Hi, I'm Jake, and today we're going to be covering and reviewing the Chaos Knights brand new 9th edition Codex. If you're new to the channel, what we do here is primarily cover competitive 40k content as well as host fun and informative battle reports. If you haven't done so yet, we'd love for you to stay up to date by being subscribed, which also greatly helps the growth of this channel. Additionally, if you're interested, of course, there are several other ways that you can interact with us more easily, such as jumping into our private Discord server, as well as various other forms to support the channel if you so choose. For example, our affiliate links, which are posted in the description below, which cost you nothing extra at all if you decide to use them. Chaos players everywhere should be excited about this Codex release for a variety of reasons, whether you're playing or plan to play pure Chaos Knights or you actually plan to include them in your Chaos detachments. Either way, let's dive right into it and take a look at what this new Codex brings.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another Black Rabbit Gaming Codex review. Today in this video we're going to be covering the brand new Chaos Knight Codex. So this is completely different than your grandpa's Chaos Knight book. A lot of good things have been in this. Some things have changed, some things haven't, but overall I am pretty excited about this book. Do I think they're going to come out and crush the meta? Maybe. We'll see.
You never know.
It could be yes, could be a no. It'll be fine. If you could kill them before, you can kill them now. So, what do you have any idea with this, Jake, or?
Yes. I am most excited about the recent news that was actually announced very recently here, actually, that you can actually bring Chaos Knights into your other Chaos armies.
Yes,
that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, I feel like in your Death Guard list, you might be able to get some help from some Dreadblades.
Right.
So that's actually what the rule is. You bring an entire super heavy auxiliary detachment. They have to be Dreadblades, and we'll cover that later. But they can fill in some gaps for you depending on what you've got in your Chaos army. Because
from a hobbyist perspective, and so yes, like Death Guard being, one of my earliest armies in 40k 8th edition, the visual appeal and the hobbying appeal, I've always wanted to pick up a knight. But granted, I'm a competitive player. I like to participate in events, so on and so forth. I could never really justify it. And, it's a hefty investment. What, 140, 150, no, are we up to $170? On a night now?
I think so.
Right?
I haven't bought a brand new one in a while, but
right.
they're getting up there.
Right. So it's like, okay, well, if you're going to get one, then obviously you're going to want to just start a whole army of it, but then you can't really fit it in properly into, like your other Chaos armies. I just never went for it. I know a lot of people do it on the hobbyist side of things, but this, to me, just makes it that much cooler actually having a set of rules to be able to play with. And like you mentioned, I think the Death Guard might be able to benefit from it, and that's a lot of reasons why I've always shoved in Contemptor Dreadnoughts with Volkites to support that much-needed shooting to keep up with a lot of things that go on in the meta. So, maybe Knights. I've never played Knights before. I'm here to learn as well, so you're going to get some reactionary responses from me while Lio drops the knowledge bombs. But either way, yeah, pretty excited about this one specifically.
And the first little bit of knowledge for you, which is kind of a spoiler, this book, as well as the Loyalist counterpart, are very heavily invested in making you want to play the Armiger or the War Dog versions of the Knights.
I think it kind of makes sense.
It's a way to get more on the table, so it becomes more beneficial to play the mission. I'm pretty sure there are other business aspects as to why GW had made the decision to push this, but the new Chaos War Dog models look pretty dope.
I think it looks cool when it's actually like spread out like this. I'm a very visual person, so It's like you see 2 or 3 knights surrounded by armigers, probably 2. I don't know. I think like point space wise, it seems like 2 is the way to go, or it sounds like it's the way to go. Surrounded by armiger knights. I don't know. For me coming off of playing.
Oh, hello, Otis.
From me having come recently competing with Custodes, previous to that was Grey Knights, and the previous to that was Death Guard. you know, when you have too much invested into like a very, very elite configuration, you can't really do much. You're restricted. So I don't know. It just kind of makes sense to me the way 9th edition is going, that they would push armigers. But you know, could it be from a sales perspective? You know, naturally, like, GW's in it to make money, and I think they will make money with all these armigers.
Yeah, it's a way to get older hobbyists to spend more money, which isn't a bad thing. Well, even knight players. A lot of knight players have invested in the larger model range. Maybe onesies or twosies of the war dogs or the armigers. But overall, I think people will be excited about this. I personally do think that this book is better than the Imperial Knight book. So let's get into it and we'll figure it out together. So let's kick this off by getting into how you now construct your Chaos Knight detachments. They've kind of changed, which I think the change is for the better for the most part. But it still starts off exactly the same as it used to, that you select one of your knights to be a character, and they're the leader of your traitorous lance. The entire detachment gets their household abilities, and the war dogs get objective secured. So from the data slate that had come out months ago, and then with the one that they had to adjust again a couple weeks ago, at the time of filming this at least, they obviously knew that those were options that were going to be happening, that models would count as additional models and the smaller knights would go ahead and have objective secured. So now you have officially, and that rule is here to stay.
Yeah, it's pretty big. I mean, we've all played quite a bit against knights like pre-OBSEC era, I guess.
Yeah, that absolutely changed the game for them.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's sometimes there's multiple situations where it's just feel bad for the knight's part. It's like, yeah, sorry, my Poxwalker is going to toe in. I own this objective.
Yeah.
It just makes no sense. So, you know, I absolutely love the change, and just made him that much better, even like, you know, just building up.
So with the traitorous lances, they've kind of changed how you get CP refunded from them. The way it works now is if your detachment contains between 1 and 2 aberrant class models, which those are the medium-sized style knights, or between 3 to 5 war dog class models, you get 3 CP back. So that's like you're trying to do your minimalist type thing in your detachment, you get at least 3, but always keep in mind that as soon as you take 1 titanic model, it costs 6 CP to take it. So additionally, a different way to construct your lance is if it contains 3 or more aberrant class models, or 6 or more war dogs and at least 1 titanic model, you get 6 command points back. So again, this is GW's attempt to push you towards bringing 6 war dogs in your list. You can get away with taking the 3 big ones, but a lot of the stratagems and things are, you're going to want to bring the war dogs to play the game. Additionally, you could take Dreadblades in their own Supreme Heavy Detachment, or Supreme Heavy Auxiliary Detachment rather, and the special thing about all of these is in the auxiliary detachments, you still get the benefits of everything, where typically you don't. So that is a huge change, and also helps out when you're funneling these into those other armies. Just like before, you've got the 2 different major households, or the styles of households. So you've got your Iconoclast still, and you have Infernal still. Iconoclast hasn't really changed, as there's still +1 attack and +1 AP whenever they charge or get charged or heroically intervene. So that's still pretty good, especially in the new world of Armor of Contempt. A lot of your weapons are still going to be cutting through them just as effectively as base at that point. Now there is quite a significant change to Infernal Households though. So this still has the same mechanic that you can either take 1 mortal wound and roll a D3 on a chart and gain the benefit of that roll, or you can take D3 mortal wounds and pick which one you specifically want. The change comes in the table. So now you can either add 3 inches to your model's movement, you can give your knight transhuman, so your knight can only be wounded on a 4 or more, or you select one of its weapons, either ranged or melee, and you give yourself +1 to wound. Now those
are all pretty good.
Yeah,
and the fact that it occurs in the command phase, I dig that quite a bit.
So the issue with that is if you don't go first, you can't turn on your buffs, which is unfortunate, but that's a small price to pay for potentially making your T7 models or T8 models or whatever shrug off or treat strength 16 weapons that are popping up now with Tau and other things, and just saying, no, you're not going to wound me as well.
Right.
So if you get that first turn, it's a huge issue for your opponent. Otherwise, you got to try and use terrain, hide the war dogs, just take it on the chin with an aberrant model or a tyrant. But those are very powerful, and the different households are split up, and you'll get different benefits, different relics, different warlord traits only go to certain types of houses. But overall, these type of things are pretty good in my opinion. Additionally, whenever you're selecting your household bonds, if you do end up taking a Dreadblade detachment, either super heavy auxiliary, or you decide to just bring an entire army of Dreadblades, every single unit has to pick specifically from the list. So you're going to have a variety of different units that you're going to have walking around, which can be useful if you anticipate each knight being able to specialize in different types of things from the different benefits. The biggest change is now your army-wide bonus. These are called dreaded abilities, and they essentially act as an aura. They don't have the aura keyword or anything like that, so they can't be turned off by your opponent through various means. But you have a 12-inch range from all of your knights that have different abilities from a specific table that we will cover later. They were briefly covered in Warhammer Community, but I think some of them have a lot of merit, or they give a reason to try and leverage a lot of leadership and morale phase shenanigans that a lot of armies just kind of don't really do much with. So it's an interesting thing. I don't think it will be super helpful in a lot of instances, but when it is helpful, it can be.
It's an interesting caveat that the last line item there is that the dreaded abilities are unaffected by rules that affect aura abilities and vice versa.
Yep. So it protects you that you always have at least your 12-inch range when using these abilities. There are different ways to increase them, or some specific dreaded abilities might have less range, but you are always guaranteed them. You don't have to worry about someone running up to you and vox screaming you or anything like that. So on to the households. There are significantly less households for Chaos Knights than there is for their Loyalist counterparts, at least for like the known households. They still have about the same pick your own, but starting off with the Iconoclast house, first we start off with House Herpetrax, not Herpex. I confused and read that very quickly before. I was like, excuse me, what? So being Iconoclast, again, they have the +1 attack and +1 AP when they fight and they charge, get charged, or heroically intervene. But their household bonus is their War Dog class models gain 2 wounds, and their Aberrant and larger class models get 4 wounds. So not a bad start. For 1 command point, they have Warping Presence, and you select this stratagem at the start of the fight phase, and pretty much you roll a d6 for every enemy unit within 6 inches. On a 2 to 5, they suffer 1 mortal wound. On a 6, they take d3. Nothing too crazy there. The Warlord trait Bow to None is you don't suffer any penalties to your or penalties or modifiers from their characteristics unless you're degrading. So if you're taking damage, you're going to naturally have those penalties because those are your new characteristics. But if there's anything else affecting you in any way, your movement, your shooting, or anything like that, you just don't care. Additionally, each time the Warlord makes an attack, you can ignore any or all modifiers to the hit, wound, or damage rolls, which that could be nice in a world of damage reduction 1. And each time the Warlord advances or declares a charge, you ignore the modifiers to the advances and charges. The relic is the Crown of Jedartha. Is that right? I can't read. Reading's hard.
Jadathra?
Jadathra. Jebediah Springfield.
That.
So this has to go on an Aberrant class model or a War Dog class model. And each time a melee attack is made against the bearer, subtract 1 from the enemy's hit roll. This seems like a house that you're going to take just to make more tanky, just from the additional wounds.
I thought for a second that the second point of the Warlord trait actually negated like Avatar or Nightbringer rules, but it's just modifiers, isn't it?
As in reduction-wise?
Right. Because it looks like it's just modifier, like modifier to hit, so, you know, ignore the -1 to hit or -2 to hit, or, you know, whatever.
Right, so it wouldn't technically modify like a wound cap.
Right.
But if you have a damage reduction, that would be modifying your damage or your damage.
Like half damage from sisters and
or the Avatar of Cain, something like that, where it modifies or changes your damage roll. But again, this would only really take place if you're hitting them with D6 damage weapons.
Right.
But that's a way to get around it. Honestly, the house isn't my favorite, but it's
That's some cool stuff.
It's a beginner-friendly type chaos house because you just have more wounds to play with. Next is House Lucarius. Again, Iconoclast house. Their bond is, each time a model with this bond is selected to fight, you can reroll one hit roll and one wound, reroll a hit or a wound roll when resolving that model's attack. For 1 CP, you've got Trample Them. Use a stratagem in the movement phase when you select a House Lucarius Titanic model from your army to make a normal move or advance. Anytime you move over an enemy unit that is not an aircraft, you roll a d6 and add 1 to the result if they have between 6 to 10 models, or add 2 if they've got 11 or more. On a 3 to 6, they take d3 mortal wounds. On a 7+, they take d6 mortal wounds. So as long as you've got the movement to go ahead and clear and walk over those type of units, just free mortal wounds. The Warlord trait, strike first, strike often. Some Cobra Kai stuff going on in this dojo. At the start of the fight phase, if the Warlord is in engagement range, you can always fight first. Not really the strongest ability, but that can be helpful at times. And relic is the Serpent Strike Core. You select a Demon Breath Meltagun, Twin Demon Breath Meltagun, Demon Breath Spear, or Demon Breath Thermal Cannon. And pretty much with all the words that it puts down on the page here, all it does is it gives you your bonus +2 damage all the time, no matter what range you're at. So this could be a relic that you throw onto a huntsman or a stalker with a thermal spear, or the demon breath spear, and they just always have the +2 damage. It might not be something you want to put on the bigger thermal cannons, because you're sacrificing potential +2 for just a flat plus, or a potential +4 instead of a flat +2 all the time. So could be all right if you're trying to take a war dog with a demon breath spear and make it a warlord or an important character to you. Any opinions on Lucarius?
Oh, I moved on to Chimera.
Oh, well, what would you like to tell us about House Chimera?
I will. I was reading a little bit about it.
All right.
This is actually a pretty interesting household bond trait. So, yeah, so this is part of the Iconoclast household as well. But so their household bond is each time a model with this bond makes an attack, if that attack is made against a unit that was below half strength when this model was selected to shoot or fight. Shoot or fight, I like that. Add 1 to the wound roll. It's not bad.
Yeah, it's really strong.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, you're shooting stuff, and then you actually get the bonus in melee. That's pretty unique. Like I'm not super familiar with knights, like I was saying, but being able to plan that out and kind of get in there, I like that. I like that quite a bit.
Pretty much like a turn 2 permanent buff across the board.
Right, right.
If you can sprinkle out your damage here and there, you're going to be just hitting everything that much harder.
Right. Because I don't recall. I think I've played against Imperial Knights the most, but I don't recall there were that many ways to get like a plus wound off.
There really isn't. And
in Knights Codex,
generally in Knights Codexes, there are very minimal ways to get rerolls as well.
Yeah. So. And already like we're 3 pages in, and it's like, oh, rerolls and +1 to wound. It's pretty good. As far as their stratagem goes, Fury of the Surtur's Wake. Surturs. I just wanted to say it. I'm not going to say every stratagem name, but this is all very funny. Use the strat in the charge phase when a House Chimera model from your army finishes a charge move, and then you select 1 enemy unit within engagement range of your model and roll 4d6. If this model is Titanic, roll 6d6 instead. For each dice result that equals or exceeds that enemy unit's toughness characteristic, it suffers 1 mortal wound. For each unmodified roll of a 6, that enemy unit suffers 2 mortal wounds instead. If this model is a War Dog class model, this stratagem costs 1 CP, otherwise it costs 2 CP. Pretty cool. Yeah. Very similar to like the NID stratagem, and just having a way to access and reliably dump out mortal wounds is really good, considering it's a 1 CP strat.
In this book, there are a multitude of ways to throw out mortal wounds, and this is the first instance where it comes up with a pretty good mechanic, in my opinion, that it allows you to spend different amounts of CP depending on the style of knight that is trying to use it. So typically a smaller knight will have to spend less CP than an aberrant or a tyrant class knight.
I promise you, I swear, I have not read ahead. This is first impression. This whole codex is first impression for me. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Adam Baker, who did the Imperial Knights video, to be able to do the second video, but it's okay. It'd be interesting to see the first impressions as well. But what I will say, I'm feeling like this codex is very melee oriented. It
has some tricks in shooting, but the Chaos Knights definitely want to be closer in a lot of instances.
Like reading like these house traits so far, it's like, I really want to get your knight up into the fight.
Yeah, and that's another way to leverage the doom and despair and the dreaded abilities.
Right. I mean, just doing this video is probably going to get me excited to maybe do Chaos Knights.
So finishing out their Warlord trait, Maddened Cries. While an enemy unit is within 9 inches of the Warlord at the start of each morale phase, it must take a dreaded test, which is essentially just a leadership test. If the test fails, the unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So, nothing too crazy just for 1, but if you're waiting in the middle of someone's army, that could be a wound here, a wound there, a wound there.
Yeah.
So that's okay. I think there are other better dreaded abilities that we can play with later on. And the relic is Warpfire Shield. It goes to this house specifically only. And the bearer is a 5-up invulnerable save against melee attacks. Each time the melee attack is made against the bearer on unmodified saving throw of 6, the attacking model unit suffers 1 mortal wound after the unit's attack have been resolved to a maximum of 6 mortal wounds per attacking unit. Which, the important thing about this is, it's any type of save. So if you're just taking basic armor saves, or if you're forced to take invulnerable saves, it doesn't matter. If you roll a 6, you're bouncing wounds back. And there's kind of a few instances of this in this book. So...
melee.
Well, then there's other instances in other ways.
Yes.
But bouncing back mortal wounds, it might make someone rethink just trying to death by 1,000 cuts you or shoot a bunch of incidental fire because you wounded me, take a wound back.
I think the 5-up invul alone in melee is pretty huge, considering, as we learned, the Imperial Knights really don't have a way to access something like that.
Right.
So granted, it's on 1 knight, fine, but still, like you were saying, it's gonna really prevent people from just, there's so many like -4 AP, -3 AP weapons that do like insane amounts of damage. Mm-hmm. So I think this helps greatly.
Yeah, the access to invulnerables in combat is not very well felt in these books. Moving on to the first of the Infernal Households, which again I kind of prefer the Infernal Households a little more. Their ambition is Titankin, and each time a model with this bond is selected to shoot, you can reroll 1 hit roll and 1 wound roll when that model attacks. 1 CP, they have an Auspex scan. That is their stratagem. As long as something is... actually, I'm sorry. No, that's a different house. This one is you get to ignore penalties to hit when you're shooting.
Does that trump the Harlequin's Players of the Light?
No, because that's not a modification to my ballistic skill. That is just a flat 1, 2s, or 2s, 3s, and 4s fail to hit.
Oh, okay. Same wording as transhuman.
Right. So this would be you ignore dense, or you ignore anything else that's a penalty to hit.
Tide of Shadows, -1 to hit banners, so on and so forth. Got it.
The Warlord trait is Favor of the Dark Mechanicum. If this Warlord is a War Dog class model, add 1 to its wounds characteristic. If the Warlord is a Titanic, add 2. At the start of your command phase, this Warlord regains D3 lost wounds. That could be very beneficial because you might be taking D3 wounds a turn in the command phase from trying to buff yourself with the infernal powers. The relic is the Heretic Power Core, and it adds 2 inches to your movement each time the bearer makes a melee attack, unless the attack is made using a sweep profile from a melee weapon. Add 1 to the damage characteristic of the attack.
Fair. They're getting smart with the breaking of the rules.
Yeah. So this can be quite beneficial because a lot of like the direct hit melee attacks, some of them are flat 6 damage, some of them are flat 8, flat 3, flat 4. There is just a lot of damage that if you just bump it up by 1 when someone has that all too now common damage reduction 1, you just negate it. Next is House Comentis, which this is my favorite Dread household by and far. So their Traitor's Ambition is anytime they go to use the Demonic Surge ability to buff themselves, if you elect to use take 1 mortal wound to roll the D3 on the table, you get to re-roll the result. If you decide you want to take D3 mortal wounds, you get to select and apply 2 of the abilities. That is immensely powerful. If you just want to be like, I'm going to buff one of my weapons and give myself transhuman this turn. Okay, fantastic. Or I really need to get around this piece of terrain, so I want to add 3 inches to my move and buff one of my weapons, or maybe make myself a little more tanky. That is just crazy powerful to just pick 2.
Yeah, I'm not usually fans of any kind of mechanic where you have to hurt or kill yourself to gain something positive, but this is probably one of the best ones I've seen.
Even just taking the risk of just taking 1 to try and fish for the thing you want, that's way better than just being left it up to the dice gods.
I like to gamble. I mean, it's only D3. The worst that happens is 3 mortals, but like picking 2 traits, that's pretty awesome.
It's definitely worth it.
Very chaos.
Their stratagem is Encircling Hounds for 1 command point. What this does is allows you to pull 2 War Dog models that were put in strategic reserve earlier, and they're allowed to come into the game 1 turn early. So if you decided to spend command points to put 2 War Dogs in for 2 CP, they can still walk back on the table turn 1. Or there's another stratagem or ability later on in this book where you can just pick 2 of them that are on the table. If they're near a board edge, they walk off on turn 1. Turn 2, they can walk back on in someone's deployment zone. So people aren't used to having to spread out or screen or plan for knights coming in, but when you can just go ahead and throw 2 models in someone's backfield and them not expect it, that's a huge problem for them. And that just gives you added durability to try and protect yourself early game or late game. The Warlord trait is Dread Hunter. Once per battle at the start of your shooting phase, the Warlord can make a killing strike. If he does so, select 1 ranged weapon with the Warlord's is equipped with until the end of the phase. Each time an attack is made with a weapon, you can re-roll the hit, you can re-roll the wound, and you can add 1 to the damage characteristic. So if you've got a really shooty knight, you really want to try and see something die that turn, you just pump all the shots into it, leverage all the re-rolls, and get a little more damage out of it.
Spicy.
And the relic is Demonic Shrike. It's specifically to a Terra Shade model, which Terra Shade is a new keyword that is on all of the brand new War Dog models, as well as the brand new Abominant model. At the start of each of your shooting phases, select 1 enemy unit within 18 inches of the bearer until the end of the turn. Each time a range attack is made by the bearer against the enemy unit, improve the armor penetration characteristic of the attack by 1. So there you were talking about how everything seems geared to combat. This is a fairly shooty style house. Probably the next runner-up for my favorite house, which is the last known house of the book, is House Korvax. Their house bond is Forged in Terror. So once per battle at the start of any battle round, you can select 1 Harbinger ability, which that's their army-wide ability, from the corresponding to the current battle round or any previous battle round. The ability becomes active for every model with this bond in your army, even if every unit for your army does not have the Chaos Knights keyword. So you're throwing out special aura abilities or special buffs or special protections on your models, even if they're not Chaos Knights. Do I think that would technically pop up very often? No, but you get to select one from the current battle round or previous. So you get to go ahead and enact different buffs. For 2 CP, they have the Knights of Shade. This is probably one of the better stratagems in the entire book. So you kind of have to select an okay house to get it. But what you end up doing is at the start of your movement phase, you either select one Titanic model or 2 War Dog models. They then are allowed to ignore terrain and models and move through them as if they're not there.
Oh, geez.
So you can set yourself up behind an obscuring piece of terrain. You just buffed your movement up to +3 inches. Your War Dogs go moving up the table at that point 15 inches. Then they go ahead and just move through that terrain.
That's terrifying.
And you can use it in the charge phase as well.
That ruin was like your safety net blanket going up against knights, saying like you can't touch me. That's terrifying.
Yep, they just phase on through it. They can do it in the charge phase. So if you're trying to use a wall as protection, nah, I'm just gonna go ahead and phase on through this. The Warlord trait is Lord of Dread, so you add 3 inches to the range of the Warlord's aura's abilities to a maximum of 12, and you add 3 inches to the Warlord's dreaded abilities. That's probably not something that I would elect to pick immediately, but extra range is always nice. The relic is the Rune of Darkness, which, if any of you are Tau players, you might be very familiar with something like this. It essentially gives the model with the relic a one-time use savior protocol. So any kind of damage you take, once per game, you're allowed to go ahead and reduce that damage to 0. Now, the issue with it is, though, is after you've used the relic, you roll 2d6. If you roll less than your leadership, you can use it again. So potentially you have 5 uses of turning some kind of damage to damage 0.
That's amazing.
This house is, I love their stratagem, I love their relic. The bond ability, the Warlord trait, not so much. But these 2 past houses are definitely my 2 top picks.
I mean, it was huge. Like every game that I played with Custodes, pretty much, like I was popping that as Trajan's ability, where you reduce damage by 0. So like being able to potentially use that 5 times, it's pretty massive, considering railguns still exist and stuff.
Yeah. So once per battle round. Just roll less than your leadership and you're fine.
Easy peasy.
So now for the choose your own adventure ones. The thing about these, like I said earlier, is if you are a Dreadblade detachment, either full-scale army or you have slotted a super heavy auxiliary detachment and have to be Dreadblade by default, these are what you pick from. So specifically for if you want to be an Iconoclast household, which if you are a Dreadblade detachment, you do not benefit from the Iconoclast household's +1 attacks, +1 AP. You don't get to use Demonic Surge. So, you just kind of have to show your allegiance and go for it from there.
Do you see any standout combinations of potentially running an optimal custom house?
The thing about these is there are some that are pretty okay.
Yeah.
Like you can build around them and try them out, and they're pretty fun. You might have something to do. There weren't too many that I'm like, ew, absolute trash.
Yeah.
But there weren't really any that were like, I absolutely have to take this over any of the custom house or the specific houses. But they're pretty nice, especially if you have that Dreadblade and you can pick and choose several of these to apply to your army, because every unit needs to have a different form of this.
Yeah, I mean, at face value, they look really pretty good. But from all of the house traits, mainly like relics and warlord traits that we were talking about, I don't know. Those seem so powerful. I can't really see taking this over like any of the house traits. But all of this looks great for like souping in a knight into like your chaos army. For instance, like the precision cruelty is amazing. It's on unmodified wound rolls of 6, improve AP of that attack by 1 and add 1 damage characteristic to that attack. Like that sounds really awesome.
Yeah, the biggest downside for a lot of these is just losing the Traitorous Ambitions ability.
As like pure knights. Yeah, I'm just saying like there's some really good utility things it looks like to be able to, complement your Chaos Army with knights. But
yeah, absolutely.
The Warlord traits and the relics just look too good to me that I don't see that being the move to do.
Right. But first off, with the Iconoclast house, the first one is Bold Tyrants, which each time a model with this Fell Bond makes a range attack, if the target of the attack is within 18 inches, improve the armor penetration of the attack by 1. So if you're playing hyper aggressive and you want to run a whole bunch of the new chain cannons on the stalkers or anything like that, you can just start shredding stuff at AP3 as long as you're playing aggressively. So next is Frenzied Invaders. Each time a model with this Fell Bond makes a melee attack, an unmodified hit roll of 6 scores an additional hit. Infamous Heredity. Yeah, I said that right. Infamous Heredity. So what this one does, it pretty much caters to the more fluffy players that they want to call their house whatever it is, but they want to use the traits and warlord traits and stratagems of the noted houses on the few pages before. So you pretty much just lose access to the relic specifically. If you're going to an event, like GW events typically force you to play whatever you're painted as or something like that. If you want to use those type of things, you go ahead, you use this, you have access to at least some of it. Or if you're just more of a casual, fluffy style narrative player, this just gives you access to that stuff. Learned Idolators is the next one. Each time an attack was made with an armor penetration characteristic of -1, it is allocated to this model with this Fell Bond. That attack has an armor penetration characteristic of 0 instead. Not great, but it'll help you from getting shredded by a whole bunch of AP1 attacks. Loping Predators. In your shooting phase, each time a model with this Fell Bond is selected to shoot, if it has the advance this turn, then until the end of your shooting phase, it counts as remain stationary. That can be pretty powerful for getting around terrain or just staying mobile and running and gunning. Precision Cruelty. Each time a model with this Fell Bond makes a ranged attack, an unmodified wound roll of 6 improves the armor penetration characteristic of the attack by 1, and adds 1 to the damage characteristic of the attack. So, especially if you are taking a Dreadblade detachment and slotting it in, that's a very powerful one if your list is lacking shooting. Since there's no range restriction, you can sit back with the War Dog Executioners and just pump out potentially AP3 shots at damage 4. And that's just kind of disgusting. I'm
assuming there's ways to explode shots and...
There's just so many ways to supplement either low amount of attacks or get additional things. So, yeah, I would...
Yeah, that one definitely caught my eye.
This is probably one of the better of these type of things. Prideful Wrath is next. Models with this Fell Bond whose characteristics can change as they suffer damage are considered to have double the number of wounds. So that just keeps you in the fight significantly longer, because at that point you need to be down to 3 wounds for a War Dog to finally degrade, and then they need to be at 1 wound to be in their final bracket.
Iron Hands, baby.
There you go. And then that's doubly powerful on like the Aberrant class or the Tyrant, where now they have to be down to 6 wounds to even be struggling to do anything. And last for Iconoclast is Worthy Offerings. Each time a model with this Fell Bond makes an attack against a monster, vehicle, or character unit, add 1 to that attack's hit roll. If a model with this Fell Bond had a favor of the Dark Gods, which those are upgrades that you pay points for, and it destroys a monster, vehicle, or character model during the phase, at the end of the phase, its offer is accepted, regardless of how many marks it has in the offering tally. Again, that's another one that you might want to take if you're in a very monster, vehicle-heavy meta. Tyranids now. So if you're supplementing in these to other types of units, that could be a good way to leverage out your Dark Devotions.
I feel like Iron Hands could make a comeback to some degree.
As a whole? or like
Just
this
like-
specifically?
Oh, no, yeah, just more like visible and or more prominent within like the tournament scene, like just coming back with their dreads and their vehicles and stuff. I don't know. It'd be really interesting considering how like recently Armor of Contempt came out, but you know, something like that. Maybe. I don't know. You never know.
And I think people would be a little bit more likely to try running vehicles, especially vehicles that they might never have looked at before, with them reducing
AP by
AP
one.
by one.
Yeah.
So that could be something just to help you out.
All right, Infernal Household. Pretty interesting. I get to handle the fire one. All right, so the first one is Bound Vassals. Use this household bond of the Dread household you selected, as listed on pages 58 to 63. If a character model with this fell bond gains a warlord trait, they can have the Dread household warlord trait associated with the Dread household you selected instead of a warlord trait from Warlord Traits page. If a character has such a warlord trait, replace all instances of the keyword Dread household on that Dread household warlord trait. If any with the name Dread household that this character is from. That's a lot of words.
Yeah, it is. It's exactly.
And there's like 3 pages of referencing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the same exact thing that I covered before with the Iconoclast house. So you just have access to the ability or the bond tradition, the warlord trait, and the stratagem.
So furthermore, you will gain access to the Dread household stratagem associated with the Dread household you selected. When using such stratagem, replace all instances of the Dread household keyword on that Dread household stratagem with the Dread household keyword that the unit with this fell bond have. So basically the same thing for strats.
Yes.
Cool. Look, I learned. Dark Forging is the next one. Add 4 inches to the range characteristic of ranged weapons models with this fell bond are equipped with, and add 1 to the strength and damage characteristic of any Diabolus heavy stubbers that a model with this fell bond is equipped with. And then each time a model with this fell bond selects a target for a Diabolus heavy stubber that it is equipped with, you can ignore the Lookout Sir rule.
That's an interesting one if you just want to like pepper spray some maybe T3 characters that are hiding around and there's no range restriction, so if you got line of sight and range, you can just try and pick them off.
It's a pretty big side camera one because that's like one of the 3 most commonly asked like pre-game questions. Like, you know, do you have teleport abilities? Can you advance in charge? And do you have any snipers? It's like the top 3 questions.
Yeah, and pretty much every knight can come with at least one of those stubbers.
Yeah, and it makes you play differently when there's snipers on the board, so interesting. Next one, Merciless Tormentors. Each time a model with this fell bond makes a ranged attack, if the target of that attack is within 18 inches of the model, reroll a hit roll of 1. So there's reroll hits. It's not bad. It's okay. Geiss of Ruin. Each time a ranged attack is made against a model with this fell bond, if the attacker is more than 18 inches away, then the model with this fell bond is treated as having the benefits of flight cover against that attack.
I think this one's a trap because the boards are smaller, it's easier to get in that range. You want to play aggressively in a lot of instances, so you might only benefit from that for maybe turn 1.
And there's so many things that ignore light cover anyway, or
Right.
they ignore cover. Yeah, I don't know. Hellforge Construction. Each time an attack with a strength characteristic of 7 or less is allocated to a model with this fell bond, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of that attack, to a minimum of 1, of course.
Just run around with knights with ramshackle.
It's not bad. But I mean, what is really scary that's under damage 7, or strength 7 though?
Not like people are spamming them anymore, but heavy bolters, autocannons,
Volkites.
Volkites,
Right? Strength
shuriken
6.
weapons, or shuriken cannons.
Yeah, that's fair. That's okay.
They'll still punch you with the AP 3 or 4, but keeping them down to damage 1 is...
It seems very specific. Yeah. I mean, if it took me a minute to even think of like under 7, but basically it sounds like 2 damage weapons are going to be reduced down to 1. Yeah. Biomechanical Fusion. If a Dreadblade model has this fell bond, that model gains the Demonic Surge Traitorous Ambition, even though Dreadblade units cannot normally have a Traitorous Ambition. Each time a model with this, or secondly, each time a model with this Fellbond, excluding Dreadblade models, suffers a mortal wound whilst using its demonic surge, Traitorous Ambition, on a 4-up, that wound is not lost. It's not bad.
That's a pretty good way. Like, I feel like if you're taking that only for the 4-up, ignore the wound, you can take so many other things that are much more helpful to you while still having access to the demonic surge Traitorous ability.
Unhallowed Inscriptions is the next one up. Each time a unit with this Fellbond would lose a wound as a result of a mortal wound, unless that mortal wound is inflicted as a result of using the demonic surge Traitorous Ambition, roll 1d6 on a 5-up, that wound is not lost. Add 1 to deny the witch tests made for the Psyker models with this Fellbond. I don't know.
Nah.
Yeah.
No.
And the last one is Warp Vision. Each time an attack is made by a model with this Fellbond, the target does not receive the benefits of light cover against that attack. I just feel like it got very lackluster towards like the second half of the Infernal Household.
I feel like Iconoclast is the better half of these, but again, there's nothing super ultra mega terrible. Like, you can probably make an argument for most of these and just play around with them, but the notable houses or Iconoclast is probably where I would put my effort into. And
I keep going back into like the like souping in your knight, or actually like getting in a knight into your chaos army. I think there's plenty in here that can really flexibly accompany your forces of chaos. Like, while we're kind of scoffing over the whole mortal wound negation one or the mortal wound feel no pain, I think an argument could be made for having a need for that. Especially with Tyranids entering the meta, it's like, it's not horrible. Like, if you need to build around that, then you can, it looks like you have plenty of ways to actually customize your knight that you want to include, if you want to include one, into your standard force of whatever that might be. So, not horrible. But no, I agree. I'm not sure there's anything in here that stand out enough to take over the standard builds. Yeah.
All right, now to tackle all the stratagems. So, like all the previous codexes, you pretty much get 4 entire pages of stratagems. And like I said at the beginning of the video, a lot of these are more focused or geared towards the War Dog class of knights, which isn't a bad thing, especially with the variety that we have. So the first stratagem is break their lines for 1 command point. It can specifically only be used on Iconoclast household models, but when you do it, whenever you select your model to fight, if they've made a charge move that turn, they add 1 to their attack's hit roll, which that can be pretty powerful for only 1 CP.
Hungry for Combat, 2 CP strat. Use a strat in the fight phase. Select 1 enemy unit from your opponent's army. I like how it indicates that. Until the end of the phase, each time a War Dog class model from your army makes a melee attack against that enemy unit, unmodified hit rolls of 6s automatically wound the target. There's the combat strat.
There you go.
Yeah.
So the next one is also a combat stratagem. It's Pack Hunters for 1 command point. Use the stratagem at the start of the fight phase, and you select 1 enemy unit with engagement range of 2 of your War Dog models, and the War Dog models get +1 attack.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Melee.
Just bully the shit out of that 1 unit.
Yeah, and you can double those 2 strats up.
Yeah, if you want to burn a lot of strats and get auto wounds, exploding hits, there's a lot of potential just to bully some stuff with your War Dogs or even some of the bigger knights.
Oh yeah, I can see some combos already just between like the household stuff that we're talking about. Skies of Fire is a 1 CP strat, and you use this one in your shooting phase when a War Dog class model from your army is selected to shoot. Until the end of that phase, each time that model makes an attack against an aircraft unit, add 1 to the hit roll. Okay.
So very similar to how it used to be. Unfortunately, you can't use it against fly models, it's specifically aircraft, but you have the added benefit that you can use it on any of the War Dogs. So it's not just the Executioners or the Loyalist Helverins or whatever, But if you need to throw melt-a-shots into the sky, you could do that. If you got the chain cannon, whatever. So add a little bit of flexibility back into the stratagem.
There's enough aircrafts flying around these days that need to be taken down, and that -1, like the hard to hit roll, certainly makes things annoying. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's not a bad utility for 1 CP. Murder Bliss for 1 CP. I took the last one, so Murder Bliss is you.
Murder Bliss for 1 command point. You can specifically use it on a Slaanesh Chaos Knight model, which you gain the God keywords by spending points on them. We'll cover that in a bit.
Ooh.
But you use it on a Slaanesh Chaos Knight model. If that model is within engagement range of 1 or more enemy units that contain 6 or more models until the end of the phase, add 1 to the model's attack characteristic. If 1 or more of those enemy units contain 11 or more, add 2 to your attack characteristic. So it's just a cheap way to try and blender your way out of a big unit.
And Tormented Wrath for 2 CP, use the strat in your shooting phase. Select 1 enemy unit from your opponent's army. Until the end of that phase, each time a War Dog class model from your army makes a ranged attack against that enemy unit, an unmodified hit roll of 6 scores 1 additional hit. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Crushed like Vermin for 1 command point. Use a stratagem in the fight phase when a Titanic Chaos Knight is selected to fight. You specifically need to use your Titanic feat, and when you do this, you subtract 1 from your hit rolls. Any of your hits that are successful after using the stratagem, unless it's against a monster or vehicle, your damage is immediately transferred from whatever to 2 mortal wounds. So in a lot of instances, if you've got like a rampager, you've got your numerous base attacks with the feat because you no longer get additional attacks, you just use your base attack profile, but you really want to get rid of a tough, maybe elite infantry unit. You pop this, you're still hitting on 3s, 4s at worst if you're a different type of class of knight, and then for every hit, take 2 mortal wounds. It's a pretty good way to try and stamp out some hard to move units.
What are they on average, like 3 attacks base, 4 attacks
4
base?
attacks.
4 attacks?
For the most part.
Gotcha.
I think the Abominant is the one that has the least amount of base attacks at
Right.
3, but he's got his own sweep. Like there are lots of ways to still get multiple attacks unless you're a despoiler with 2 guns. But
Yeah, like at face value, it didn't look like much doing 2 mortal wounds and the attack sequence ends, but that makes sense. With only 4 attacks, you have to hit on 3s, or yeah, you would
3s or 4s.
Yeah, 3s or 4s, and then you'd have to wound. It seems like maybe you'd average like 1 or 2, forcing 1 to 2 saves where your opponent gets the save. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, now you're
I could
just
see this coming into play.
on the hit roll, take mortals.
Yeah, and doing 2 mortals is enough to steal an objective. So, cool. Vengeful Outcasts for 2 CP. Use the strat in the fight phase when a Chaos Knights, so any Chaos Knights keyword model from your army is selected to fight. Until the end of the phase, each time that model makes an attack against an Imperial Knights model, add 1 to the wound roll. Veterans of the Long War, basically.
Essentially, but against your loyalist cousins.
Yes. Mixed with Hateful Assault. Kind of, and they just merge.
Next up is Trail of Destruction, which is kind of different than what it used to be. Yeah, it's different than it used to be. So 1 command point, use a stratagem in the shooting phase when a Chaos Knight model from your army is selected to shoot, or in the fight phase. When the Chaos Knight model from your army is selected to fight until the end of the phase, each time that model makes an attack, if the target of the attack is within range of an objective marker, reroll hit rolls of 1. So it's very different than what it used to be, but if you really need to try and scrape something off an objective, it might be worth the 1 CP if you've got enough shots to throw down range.
Yeah, quite a few situational strats so far. Unyielding Rage is a 1 or 2 CP stratagem. Use this stratagem in the fight phase when a Chaos Knights model from your army is selected as the target of an attack. Until the end of the phase, each time an attack is allocated to that model, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of the attack, minimum of 1. And this is not cumulative with any other rules that reduce damage characteristics of an attack, like the Hellforge Construction Fellbond. If that model is a War Dog class, it costs 1 CP. Otherwise, it costs 2 CP. Fair.
So Titanic Duel is the next one. It's 1 CP. I don't think I would ever really waste the command point on this, but It's really not too different than it used to be. Whenever your knight is fighting another titanic unit, you and your opponent secretly choose a number between 1 to 3. You can use a die, you can write it down, and then you reveal it to each other simultaneously. If the two numbers are different, you get to add that many attacks to your knight to attack that model. And do note that it has to attack the titanic unit. You can't just do that and then try and swing somewhere else.
Beseech the Dark Gods, also a 1 or 2 CP strat. Use this stratagem when a Chaos Knight's Pantheon Undivided model from your army is destroyed but does not explode. So it cannot explode, okay? Roll 1d6 at the end of the phase. On a 4-up, set that model back up on the battlefield with 3 wounds remaining, as close as possible, basically a revive. If that model is a War Dog class, it costs 1 CP, otherwise it costs 2 CP. That's pretty good.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
Because your opponent will think, oh, I don't have to worry about that knight anymore. It's down. You don't explode. And then you just stand back up. And now they have to deal with you either in the charge phase, or if they did kill you in the fight phase, now you just get up and you shoot them and you fight them.
It's a very Hail Mary strat. 50-50. Don't count on it.
It's worth it, though. I believe that used to be specific to Tyrannus before on the Loyalist side. Abominable Constitution is next at 1 or 2 command points. You use this on a Nurgle Knight, and until the start of your next command phase, the model is considered to have full wounds, so you operate at full bracket. If it's a War Dog, costs 1. If it's bigger, costs 2.
Doom and Despair for 2 CP. Use the stratagem at the start of the 3rd, 4th, or 5th battle round. If your Warlord is on the battlefield, select 1 Harbinger ability from any previous battle round. While your Warlord is on the battlefield, that ability is active for every Chaos Knight model from your army. You can only use a stratagem if every unit from your army has the Chaos Knights keyword, excluding units with the unaligned or Agents of Chaos keywords. Once per battle strat. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So the Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights, their army has added a lot of bookkeeping, and this is just a stratagem to add to your bookkeeping, but when you're able to additionally put in some of these abilities, that could be game-changing or just really beneficial. It's up to you on how much you want to try and leverage that ability.
It sounds really balanced too. Coming in at round 3, yeah, like 1 and 2. That would, yeah. That's very fair.
Next is Death Grip. So use the stratagem in the fight phase. This is different than it used to be. Instead of just doing a continuous roll off until someone beats you and you just mortal wounding them to death, what happens is you turn an attack into a strength test. If you end up beating your opponent, they no longer get an invulnerable save against the attack. So they will just take flat damage. So since you have to use it with a Warp Strike or a Slaughter Claw, they're either going to be taking D3 plus 3 damage or flat 8.
Yeah, that's pretty massive.
If they do beat you in the strength test, though, the damage is reduced to 0. So it's kind of a gamble. It's a gamble you should win, but depending on who you're going against, maybe not so much. But seems like a decent way to just squish out a character that has an invulnerable save and you just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. The Spiteful Demise. It's a 1 to 3 CP cost strat. Use a stratagem when a Chaos Knights model from your army is destroyed. Do not roll to see if that model explodes. It does so automatically. If that model is a Tyrant class model, roll 1d6 on a 4-up. The range of that explosion is 3d6. If that model is a War Dog class, the stratagem costs 1 CP. If that model is an Abhorrent class model, that stratagem costs 2 CP. Otherwise, it costs 3 CP. It's a once per game stratagem. It sounds relatively similar to the old version, right? With the 3d6?
Knights did not have an auto-explode stratagem.
Oh, they never did?
No.
Oh.
So this is just saying that if you roll that d6,
Yeah.
you get the maximum range from
Right.
a Tyrant class. But Chaos Knights or Imperial Knights never had an automatic explode thing.
Huh.
So
They just had to, when they exploded,
when they explode, they did that.
Yeah. Cool.
But this is something that if you yeet a knight into the center of someone's army and they go down, now that person has to probably take quite a bit of damage.
3d6 is scary.
I mean, spoiler, the big boy here isn't exactly something you would take, in my opinion. But taking the mortals from an aberrant class or a war dog still might be useful depending on how close everyone is. Sorry, buddy. Next up is Chosen by the Gods for 1 command point. Use this stratagem pre-game, and when you're making your army list, you're allowed to assign one of your Chaos Knights one of those God keywords if they have not already been purchased for them by using points in army construction. There's always this weird caveat that if you have an Abominant model, which is a Psyker, if you give it the Khorne keyword, it loses the Psyker keyword, but it gains an additional weapon skill and an attack. And its weapon skill and attack is improved by 1. But you do this to hand out additional keywords without having to pay physical points. You spend command points. If you're playing a Strike Force mission, you get to use this twice. If you're using an Onslaught battle, you get to use this 3 times. So it's just a way to put keywords on a couple extra knights so you can access some of those stratagems that were talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's really cool. I skipped ahead a little bit. That's pretty exciting when we get there. Corrupted Heirlooms for 1 CP, also pre-game. Use a stratagem before the battle. If your Warlord has the Chaos Knights keyword, select 1 Chaos Knights model from your army. That model can now have 1 Relic of Tyranny, even if they're not a character model. So, standard stratagem for list building.
The key thing to note with this is, as opposed to its old iteration, it doesn't give that model you gave the relic the character keyword. So it just gives them the relic. Whereas with the next stratagem, Tyrannical Court, for 1 command point, giving them the Warlord trait gives them the character keyword as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, Tyrannical Court, 1 command point, use it during list construction, 2 times during Strike Force, 3 times during Onslaught. You can't double up your Warlord trait, standard stuff there.
And the last requisition strat is Arch Tyrant. Arc Tyrant. Use the stratagem after nominating a Chaos Knights character model to be your Warlord. You can generate 1 additional Warlord trait for them. Each Warlord trait in your army must be unique. Cool. Is that the first time Chaos is getting that?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, because it's been an Imperial thing.
Yeah, it's very nice to be able to double stack a Warlord trait.
Yes, it is. Especially with as many good ones as this book seems to have.
Next is Bind the Souls of the Slain. So this is 1 or 2 command points, and it's specifically for Infernal Household Knights. Until the end of the phase, each time the model makes a melee attack that destroys an enemy model, roll a d6. Now, on a 4+, the model regains 1 wound after it has resolved all of its attacks to a maximum of 6 regenerated wounds. If this is a War Dog model, 1 CP, bigger, 2.
Hunting Hounds, 1 CP, uses strat at the start of your movement phase. Select up to 2 Dread Household War Dog class models from your army that are more than 6 inches away from any enemy models and within 6 inches of a battlefield edge. That's very specific. If the mission you are playing is using strategic reserve rules, place those models into strategic reserves. Those models cannot arrive in the same turn it was placed in.
So before, when I was talking about House Comentus and their ability to bring stuff on a turn early, if you don't want to spend 2 CP or 3 CP, well, I guess specifically 2 CP because you only do it on 2, to put War Dogs in strategic reserve at the start of the game, you hide who you want, pull them off the table, spend the command point from the household ability, bring them on turn 2 in someone's deployment zone.
Spicy.
I'm a fan of it.
A Long Leash for 1 CP, use the stratagem in your command phase. Select 1 Dread Household Knight Despoiler, Rampager, or Desecrator model from your army. Now select 1 friendly War Dog class model from your army. Until the end of the turn, that War Dog class model is always considered to be within range of the aura ability that the first model you selected has.
That's a good way just to essentially apply a good buff on one of your War Dogs and just set them loose.
Yeah, anytime you gain mobility is great. So
next is Unleash the Hounds for 1 command point. Use a stratagem in your charge phase after a War Dog class model from your army finishes a charge move. Until the end of the phase, each time a friendly War Dog class model declares a charge against the enemy unit that is engagement range of this model, you can reroll the charge. So again, another stratagem where you just use your stratagem to dogpile your opponent.
Wrath Surge for 1 CP, use the strat in your opponent's psychic phase. When a psychic test taken for a psyker unit is failed, whilst that unit is within 18 inches of a Chaos Knight Khorne model from your army, they suffer Perils of the War.
It's a pretty good way to pop some heads. And with these Khorne ability upgrades and things, maybe it's a little easier to blast some brains out.
Yeah.
Harrying Hunter is next for 2 command points. Use a stratagem in movement phase when a War Dog class model from your army falls back. This model is still eligible to shoot and charge even though it fell back.
I dig it. Reap and Rend, 1 CP. Use a strat in the fight phase when a Chaos Knights model from your army that is equipped with a Reaper Chainsword or Reaper Chain Talon, or a relic that replaces such a weapon, is selected to fight. Until the end of the phase, each time that model makes an attack, you can never reroll that attack's hit roll, but if that attack is made using the sweep profile or of a Reaper Chainsword or Reaper Chain Talon, or a relic that replaces such a weapon, make 1 additional hit roll.
So that makes your sweeps essentially 4 attacks per attack. Or 3 for the War Dogs. Next is Diabolical Bulwark for 1 or 2 command points. This is the brand new Rotate Ion Shield. If you use it on a War Dog, it costs 1, something bigger costs 2, and it's just whenever you're shot at, you get to have a 4-up invulnerable save.
Infernal Houses, looking pretty spicy here for 2 CP.
Probably will never touch it.
No?
No, because it works off of this guy.
Oh, it is that guy. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
Unfortunate.
Forgive me
I mean,
and my ignorance.
If you really want to play the Tyrant, go for it.
So for 2 CP, you use this stratagem in your opponent's command phase. That's a pretty interesting phase to actually apply something like this. Select 1 Tyrant class model from your army. Until the end of that turn, that model has the following ability. So they basically gain an aura. While a friendly War Dog class model is within 6 inches of this model, they get a 4-up invul against ranged weapons. So I guess it sounded better than it.
It's a fantastic stratagem. The issue is
The Tyrant.
you have to take this model to do it.
Right.
And I do not think this model or its brother is worth it.
You have feelings.
I've got feelings.
You got it. Okay.
Unfortunately, sad feelings. Next is Macabre Projectiles for 1 command point.
Sounds dirty.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not dirty though, because it used to be the Thunderstrike Gauntlet ability, or the Warp Strike Claw, as it's called now, that when you killed a monster vehicle, you could throw it at somebody and do mortal wounds. It's pretty much what it does now for 1 command point. Probably wouldn't use it unless you really, really want to try and snipe out a character. But again, if you kill the vehicle or monster, you get to pick a unit within 9 inches and roll a d6, subtracting 1 if the target is a character. On a 3 to 5, the unit suffers d3 wounds. On a 6, they take 3. If you really need a character dead and you've got faith in the d3 mortals, you go for it, I guess. I would probably say the CP.
Ravenous, what the hell?
Terror
Terror Shades.
Shade.
Got it. Because like pterodactyl. That was, admit it, that was amazing. For 1 CP, use a strat in the morale phase. Select 1 enemy unit within dread range of a Terror Shades model from your army. That enemy unit must take a dread test. If that test is failed, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound for each point by which their dread test was failed, to a maximum of 6.
This stratagem has very good potential, because with the dreaded abilities, there is just so much leadership manipulation that you can just go and make so many models evaporate from this stratagem. So,
Well, you read the last one. I think I'm going to skip ahead to understand page 97 here.
all right. So the last stratagem is Sorceress Ammunition for 1 command point. Use this stratagem in a shooting phase before making the wound roll for an attack made by a Chaos Knight Tzeentch model. Do not make a wound roll. You automatically wound the target. If the target was a Psyker, they must take a dreaded test. If the test is failed, the target suffers perils of the warp after the Chaos Knight's attack has been resolved. So maybe there's an annoying big bug across the table. You shot it, it's down to a few wounds. You're not too confident. Your shooting naturally is going to drown it out. So here you go. Let's make its brain explode from across the table. Again, that's not necessarily only for Psykers, but if you really, really, really need to make a wound go through or guarantee a wound happening, spend the 1 CP on a Tzeentch Knight and have a go at it.
I'm caught up on dread tests.
They're essentially just leadership.
Yes.
So up next is the Favor of the Dark Gods. This entire section, there is a lot of points, and all the points and power level upgrades completely vary depending on the size of the knight trying to take this upgrade. So I'll probably put a list here or during the conversation of everything going on. But these are just different abilities that you pay these points for to get special abilities out of the Favor of the Gods. And the way they work is each size model will have to meet a specific wound and damage level in order to unlock a special benefit. You will always start with the first level. But War Dog class models need to kill models with the equivalent of up to 5 wounds to unlock their special thing. An Aberrant class needs to kill 10, and a Tyrant class needs to kill 15. So the way this works is you can kill a single model that has 5 wounds as a War Dog, and that's going to fulfill your tally. Or you kill 2 models with 3 wounds each, because now you've equaled 5. Or if you're Aberrant class, you kill a 10 wound vehicle, you get your favor from your god. Or you kill 5 intercessors, that's 10 wounds. So as long as you meet the wound requirement, the model count doesn't necessarily matter.
It's really good.
So it covers the 4 gods and then Undivided. But just like covered in the Warcom article a few weeks ago at this point, or days, I don't know how long it's been, but Blood Shield, it's a Khorne upgrade. The model gains the Khorne keyword. Once per battle at the start of the fight phase, the bearer can activate this ability. If they do so, who they're attacking cannot take invulnerable saves, but you also cannot take invulnerable saves in return. Kind of a weird thing because there's very limited ways to even have invulnerable saves in melee, so whatever. You're not really missing too much there. If you're a Knight Abominant, you lose the Psyker keyword, you gain the Khorne keyword, you can't do any psychic powers or anything like that, but you gain 1 to your weapon skill and get +1 attack. If you end up meeting your kill tally to get your favorite ability, you can use this ability 1 more time during the game, because naturally you can only use it once per game. So kill as many models as you need to, get it twice a game. Next is Color of Infernal Brass, which I was kind of leaning into this one about saying you can make a Psyker's head pop from across the table a little bit easier. Your model gains the Khorne keyword. You gain the following ability, Color of Infernal Brass Aura. While the enemy Psyker unit is within 12 inches, they subtract 2 from their psychic test. And again, same deal if you're an Abominant, lose Psychic, gain those additional buffs. If you end up getting your favorite ability, the model cannot be targeted or affected by psychic abilities.
I like that. That's pretty strong.
Yeah, so you go ahead, you get that early in the game, you stand him in front of a wall of Psykers and be like, you can't smite me.
Yep.
The last Khorne ability is Throne Mechanicum of Skulls. I actually kind of like this one. Again, you gain the Khorne keyword. You can reroll charge rolls made for the model. And if you're an Abominant, all that stuff from before. Favorite ability is each time this model makes a melee attack, an unmodified hit roll of 6 scores 1 additional hit on the target.
For the Tzeentch favors, the first one is Pyrothrone. It's pretty cool. So obviously for all the Tzeentch favors, the model would gain the Tzeentch keyword. So long as this model is not a Knight Abominant, it gains the Psychic keyword. It can attempt to manifest 1 in your Psychic phase and attempt to deny 2, or sorry, to deny 1 in your opponent's Psychic phase. So basically, knows 1 and it can deny 1. The model knows Smite and 1 power from the Warp Storm Discipline. Nice. If this model is a Knight Abominant, or Abominant, it knows 1 additional Psychic power from the Warp Storm Discipline, and it can attempt to manifest 1 additional Psychic power in your Psychic phase. The ability is in each of your Psychic phases, you can reroll 1 Psychic test taken for this model. So this, I think, is part of the preview of Psychic Knights, and this is really cool. I really like this. Next up for the Tzeentch favors, Cursed Rune of Fate. Each time a ranged attack is made against the bearer on an unmodified saving throw of 6, the attacking model's unit suffers 1 mortal wound, so bounces back mortal wounds, after all the unit's attacks have been resolved to a maximum of 6 mortals. But most interestingly enough, the favorite ability, the model gains a 4-up invul. Just period. Yeah.
In combat, burst shooting. One of those rare instances.
That's pretty amazing, actually. It's like separating plate on steroids. The old separating plate. The last one for Tzeentch is Mirror of Fates. While this model is on the battlefield, each time your opponent spends a command point to use a stratagem, you gain 1 on a 5-up. The favorite ability is once per battle round after making a hit roll, wound roll, or saving throw for this model can use the Mirror of Fates. If it does so, you can change the result of that roll to a 6. These are all really good.
Yeah, they're all very good. And the interesting thing is you don't even have to worry about putting these on the big knights. You can just buff up a whole bunch of war dogs. Mm-hmm. If you want a war dog to sit way in the back with the executioner autocannons, farm you CP, maybe get lucky 6s here or there in the end.
Yeah.
Like you can start thinking think small. Think small with this Knight Codex now. And you can spread out your buffs and everything pretty well. So starting off with the Nurgle favors. Again, with these 3, everyone gets the Nurgle keyword and the Putrid Carapace. Each time an attack with a damage characteristic of 1 is allocated to this model, add 1 to the armor saving throw taken against the attack. The favorite ability is add 1 to the model's toughness characteristic. And full disclosure, the Nurgle one's probably my least favorite group. They're okay, but the most important thing about having the Nurgle keyword is having the operate as full stratagem be available to you. But these type of things, they don't really do it for me. But the second one is Blessing of 1,000 Poxes. Each time a model with this makes a melee attack, an unmodified hit roll of 6 automatically wounds the target. And the favorite ability, each time the model makes a range attack, an unmodified hit roll of 6 automatically wounds the target. Aura of Corruption is next. This model has the following ability, Corruption of the Body Aura. While an enemy unit is within 6 inches of this model, subtract 1 from the strength characteristic of models in that unit. Favorite ability is Corruption of the Soul, 6-inch aura of -1 from unit's toughness.
I see what you're saying.
Like they're okay,
yeah.
And I feel like Khorne and Tzeentch win out so far.
Yeah.
And then surprisingly, the Slaanesh ones are okay. I would rate them above Nurgle, but below the other 2.
Yeah, these all just seem very, very specific. I think the Aura of Corruption one was the most interesting, because I think in a lot of cases, subtracting 1 from strength, but within 6 inches, it's just really specific. But that would come into play. It's essentially a aura of -1 to wound against, like really, really like hefty weapons, or even like the ×2. So like even little characters running around with normal strength 4, it's ×2. It goes to strength 3. So But I don't know, it's just so specific.
Yeah,
Especially with that. Yeah.
I would rather use that stratagem to randomly give a knight the Nurgle keyword, so that way they unlock the operator spirit.
The strat, yeah. As far as Slaanesh, Quicksilver Throne. This model is eligible to perform heroic interventions as if it were a character. And at the start of the fight phase, if this model is within engagement range of enemy units, it fights first. The favorite ability for this one is each time this model makes a pylon or a consolidation move, it can move up to D3 plus 3 inches instead of up to 3. Yeah, it's pretty badass. very Slaanesh-y, gameplay-wise. Next up is Beguiling Majesty. Each time a melee attack is made against this model, subtract 1 from the attack's hit roll and subtract 1 from that attack's wound roll. Wow, it's huge actually. And the favorite ability is the model gains the Beguiling Majesty aura while an enemy unit is within 6 inches of this model. Subtract 1 from the attack's characteristics of models in that unit. That's super spicy.
These can be good. The issue is you want to be in combat, but all of these are only beneficial in combat. So if someone picks out that unit that easily because you have to play aggressive with it, you're like, I get no benefit of this.
Yeah, I guess it requires quite a bit of positioning. Like if you want to try to slingshot a little War Dog Knight or whatever, I guess he has to make it through there. Got it. The last one for Slaanesh is Subjugator Machine Spirit. In your movement phase, each time this model advances or falls back until the end of your shooting phase, it counts as having remained stationary. And the favorite ability, this model is eligible to charge within a turn in which it advanced or fell back. Okay.
Lastly, the final tree is the Mark of Pantheon Undivided. First one is Mark of the Dread Knight. Each time a model would lose a wound, on a roll of a 6, it's not lost. Favorite ability is on a 5+, you don't lose a wound. Next is Warpborn Stalker. This is kind of interesting. I don't think I would really use this, but it could be fun. During deployment, you can set up this model in the warp instead of setting up the battlefield. If this model is a War Dog model, any other models in the unit that are set up with it are set up on the table. So since you can only apply these to one model in an entire unit of War Dogs, whoever you put it on, they go into Warp Strike. Everyone else has to be on the table. If you do this, then during the reinforcement step for your movement phase, you can set up this model anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches away. The favorite ability is once per battle at the start of your movement phase, you can remove the model from the battlefield. Then during the reinforcement step of the next movement phase, you deep strike them back in. And if the model is not on the table at the end of the battle, it's counted as destroyed. Lastly is probably my favorite one out of all of them, is Blessing of the Dark Master. Each time an attack is made against your model, the opponent cannot reroll the hit, wound, or damage roll. When you have the favorite ability, your knight gets transhuman.
That's insane. Yeah, I mean transhuman to hits, but still, like, that's insane. And no rerolls. Now this is Harlequins on steroids.
Yeah, TA body.
Dang, that's
Or
definitely
T7,
the yeah. I agree. That's by far the MVP in all these. Yeah.
And that one is not the most expensive one in the entire group. It's 20 on a War Dog, 30 on an Aberrant, or 50 on a Tyrant.
Wow.
There are other things in here that are more expensive than that.
Like the Nurgle one. Why?
Next up, we've got Warlord traits, which Knights have never really been known for their Warlord traits, so not many of these really excite me, but some are okay. First one we've got is Eager for the Kill, and you add 1 to advance and charge rolls made for the Warlord, and while the Warlord is in your opponent's deployment zone, they get 1 additional attack. So stacking that with some of those Khorne favors, you get to reroll your charges, advances, all that kind of good stuff. You get stuck in real quick. Harbinger of Scrap Code. In the morale phase, select one enemy vehicle unit within 18 inches of the Warlord. That unit must take a dread test. If the test is failed, the unit suffers 3 mortal wounds. If that unit can also degrade, they are considered to have half the number of wounds remaining for the remainder of the battle round. And if the unit does not degrade, they are considered to have one less weapon skill or ballistic skill. Warp-haunted hull. Once per turn, the Warlord can attempt to deny the Witch as if it was a Psyker. If the unit is a Psyker, then each enemy psychic phase, it can deny the Witch one additional time. Each time the Warlord loses a wound in the psychic phase, it does not lose the wound on a 5+. Knight Diabolus. Add 1 to the Warlord's attack characteristic. Each time this Warlord makes a melee attack, reroll hit rolls of 1. That's probably my favorite out of all of these. Eager to Kill is a close second, and then followed up with the next one of Infernal Quest. Your Warlord has objective secured. So if you have a aberrant model, walk up, 10 models objective secured, that could be handy. And the last Warlord trait is Aura of Terror, which is a dreaded ability. While an enemy unit is within dreaded range of the Warlord, each time the morale test of the dreaded test is failed for the unit, your opponent must roll 1 additional d6 and discard the lowest result. So instead of rolling a leadership test on 2d6, take it on 3d6, pick the 2 highest.
Yeah, I think Infernal Quest takes the cake here.
You'd like that one the most?
I think so. I think it's the most functional.
It has its purposes, but I think having the bonuses to get to where you want to be or just leverage massive amount of attacks, that wins it for me. I like Infernal Quest, but I think Knight Diabolus is probably my favorite.
And interestingly enough, as like aggressive of a play style that I have, and as many things that actually like support melee in this codex, I almost feel like I would totally play like the bigger knight more conservatively rather than shoving it into melee. Just even like holding a backline, you know, because there are missions now in GT Knockmend that like if your Warlord dies, you don't get CP.
That's true.
You know, there's like different mechanics in 9th edition currently.
If you're worried about that, though, you don't want your Warlord to be an aberrant model anyways, since they can't hide behind obscuring. So you take the good with the bad. You want a more durable platform. They can always be targeted.
Yeah.
You might just lose them anyways.
Well, I suppose you could just Warlord trait strat this and put it on like a random for sure.
Right.
But even so, I don't know, just something about the... Anytime I see like OBSEC or like double OBSEC or something, like that usually does it in for me.
Well, it doesn't have double OBSEC. So...
No, I'm saying like any like the stratagems or the upgrades that give you that. Like if it was Aura, then Jesus.
Yeah, that'd be disgusting.
Right.
But it doesn't make sense to put it on a War Dog because they already have objective secured. It doesn't do anything special with it.
Right.
So you have to put it on a big guy.
Yeah.
I don't know. And if I feel like I didn't say this before, but with Eager for the Kill, you get the additional attack if you're in your opponent's deployment zone. And just within, not wholly within or anything like that. You get the edge of your base in there. Party time. But that's the Warlord traits. Like I said, not many of them are like super mega awesome, but the household ones, they're typically the better ones.
The way I'm interpreting it is like your actual Warlord, maybe, you know, give them a household Warlord trait, and then it seems like wherever you're missing or whatever you want to try to accomplish is spend the CP to do this pre-game.
Yep.
On like one of these guys.
You Arch Tyrant and give your Warlord 2.
Right. Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah. You want me to take this one?
If you would like to cover Psychic Discipline.
Psychic shenanigans time. The Warp Storm Discipline. This is pretty interesting. I did not skip ahead, so we're going to experience this together. Winds of the Warp. Warp charge of 6. Each time this Psyker loses a wound on a 5-up, it's not lost. And if the result of the Psychic test was 8 or more, while a friendly War Dog class model, everything is War Dog class model.
Yeah, I told you, it's Codex War Dog.
War Dog class models within 6 inches of the Psyker, they also get a 6-up feel no pain. Pretty interesting. Vortex Terrors, this is a warp charge value of 5, and if that's manifested, you select one enemy unit within 18 inches of the Psyker, and until the start of your next Psychic phase, -1 from leadership in that unit, and each time that unit is selected to shoot or fight, it must first take a Dread test. If that test is failed, then until the end of the current phase, reduce the weapon skill and ballistic skill characteristics of models in that enemy unit by 1. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, and then with all the other leadership manipulations that you get with
and the dread tests, yeah, you could be doing up to 6 mortal wounds if you can split the difference, right? On 2d6 of 12. Maybe not all the time maxing 6, but that's quite a bit.
Yeah.
18 inches and a warp charge of 5. It's really the warp charge of 5 that got me. The Storm Malevolent, this one goes off on a 7. If manifested, select one enemy unit within 18 inches of the Psyker. Until the start of your next Psychic phase, each time a friendly Chaos Knights model makes a melee attack against the unit, add 1 to the attack's wound roll. On an unmodified wound roll of 6, the target suffers 1 mortal wound in addition to the normal damage. Maximum of 3 mortal wounds can be inflicted on each enemy unit per phase as the result of this psychic power. Cyclonic Lamentation. This one goes off on a 6, and if manifested, every enemy unit within 12 inches of the Psyker unit must take a dread test. Each unit that fails this test suffers 1 mortal wound. But if the psychic test result was 11 or more, each unit that fails their subsequent dread test instead suffers D3 mortal wounds. That sounds like a bit of a trap as well.
I'm not a really big fan of that one. If you go against a lot of low leadership, it's just a way to like make models fall off here or there.
Yeah.
It's probably not one I would pick.
Yeah, I mean, but if it's low leadership armies, they're falling to, one guy dying and shooting and, right? I don't know. It seems like a trap. It seems like it wants to be a super smite aura, but it's not. Coruscating Hate. This one goes off on a 6, and if manifested, the closest enemy unit within 18 inches of and visible to the Psyker suffers D3 mortal wounds. Then roll 1d6 on a 2 to 3. The closest other enemy unit within 6 inches of and visible to that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. On a 4 up, it suffers D3 mortal wounds. Not a bad little splash and bounce.
That's I think that's pretty good. Because
Yeah.
if someone's trying to protect a character, just be like lightning bolt.
Yep. Yeah, literally lightning bolt. I just don't like it could only do like 1 to... Yeah, like it could do 1 mortal. Spite Squall is the last one. This one goes off on a 6 and select 1 enemy unit within 18 inches of the Psyker. Until the start of your next Psychic phase, that unit cannot fire Overwatch or set to defend. Storm Surges.
You leave my boys alone. Well, I don't know if they're my boys anymore. But you leave them alone.
Keep a Spite Squall tally for that unit, adding 1 to the tally each time a model in that unit is destroyed. At the end of each phase, if that unit is still on the battlefield, roll 1d6 for each mark on its Spite Squall tally. For each roll of 5 up, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. The unit's Spite Squall tally is reset to 0 at the end of each phase.
I don't think you're really bringing it for that. You're bringing it to shut off Overwatch.
Yeah.
Which, typically, in a lot of instances, Overwatch really isn't scary for Knights, but...
I feel like Tau is still very much the biggest threat to Knights.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And probably 2 Knights.
Yeah.
Because they've got enough strength 9 shooting with the heavy venom cannons, the mortal wounds just to bypass your toughness.
The perma-transhuman for Leviathan, so yeah. Yeah, shutting off the Overwatch. Again, the 18 inches, Storm Surge specifically as a great example. It's like, you got the 18, I think that really can help you close that gap.
Also, the issue is you need to get within 18 inches of the Storm Surge.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how you're shutting
I've been there.
off. I don't know what's fast enough to get there to not be overwatched before potentially you lose the Aberrant.
Yeah.
Or Abominant, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still good for like Eradicators or anything else with like Melt-A-Shots that might just pop off. But that's it for the Psychic discipline, or the Warp Storm discipline. Some good ones in there, some but not the worst psychic tree I've ever seen.
Yeah, not the worst and totally fair considering knights. I think you mentioned this in the Imperial Knights Codex. It's like if they were like really outstanding in every phase, that would be really scary.
Yeah, it's tough to balance high toughness,
Yeah.
high wound models.
Yeah, I'd say very, very average, like, which is good. Like it, you know, not trash tier. Like it would make you somewhat consider, I think, taking like a Psyker Knight, but I'm not sure that's going to be like the most optimal builds, just from what I'm reading so far.
I think the Abominant's okay.
Yeah.
You can bring him. I don't think I'm planning to bring him just yet. Mess around with him, sure, but there's some play with him.
Yeah.
Just even just for some psychic defense against the psychic heavy meta.
That's true. Yeah, even denying a, you know, psychic interrogation for that matter. Fair enough.
So on to the relics. So the first relic is Blasphemous Engine. It's for Infernal Household only, and it goes on an Aberrant class or a War Dog only. Each time the bearer would lose a wound as a result of a mortal wound while using Demonic Surge, on a 2+, you don't take the mortal wound. And the bearer is always considered to have double their number of wounds when looking at their damage profile. I think this is probably one of the better relics to take. Again, keeping your efficiency up as long as you can. You can't shake a stick at that. And then just not taking any damage anytime you're buffing yourself up, or hopefully not taking any damage, is just a really great, solid relic.
Yeah, it's pretty good considering you're probably going to Demonic Surge quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next is the Veil of Medrengard, which is an Iconoclast specific one. Again, for only War Dogs or Aberrant class. You have a 4-up invulnerable save against range attacks and a 6-up versus melee. I'm not really sure why the 6-up in melee is there. Like, that's cool, but not super useful.
Because it wants you to have hope.
I guess so. You take it for the 4-up versus shooting.
Yes.
But that's probably another really strong contender for one of the best relics, especially for Iconoclast. Helm of Warp Sight, only for Aberrant or War Dog class models. You can ignore any or all ballistic skill modifiers, and the target does not receive the benefits of cover. So if you take a Despoiler with the double gun loadout, that's a pretty solid pick. The Diamonis. Sure. It's the big fancy turbo laser destroyer. That's all that it is. It goes to flat heavy 3 shots, strength 16, AP 5, damage 6 plus D3.
What's the difference between the standard?
I believe it's plus 2 strength on here, and instead of D3 shots, flat 3.
Oh, okay.
So if you're taking the Desecrator, you can take that. It's just with no way to ignore invulnerable saves with your shooting, it's still hard to take that because the low volume of fire. If you have an opponent with no invulnerable saves and tough targets, sure, you'll probably nuke whatever you're pointing at, but not too fond of that relic. The Teeth That Hunger. It replaces a Reaper Chainsword. Each time the bearer fights, it makes 1 additional attack with this weapon. Each time the attack is made with this weapon, select one of the profiles below to make that attack with. So it's strike, it pretty much doubles your strength to make you strength 16, so plus 8 strength, AP 4, flat 6. Gives you plus 2 strength on the sweep, so your strength 10, AP 3, damage 2. And typically, like when you do sweep attacks, you get 3 attacks instead of 1 when you use that sweep profile. Kind of like I was saying in the other video with the Imperial Knight Codex, a lot of these melee weapons, they don't really impress me. I would probably rather take something that increases the longevity I can have a knight on the table, or helps buff stuff around it, because you're already killy enough with your melee. The Rune of Noctigra. It's a Dreadblade model only. When you select this relic, select 1 Fell Bond that no model from army has. The bearer gains the Fell Bond in addition to a Fell Bond it already has. The Tyrant's Banner, on Aberrant class model only. Add 3 inches to the range of the bearer's aura abilities to a maximum of 12 inches. At the start of each of your command phases, if the bearer is on the battlefield, roll a d6. On a 5+, you gain 1 command point. The limit of gaining or refunding 1 command point per battle round does not apply to this. So you get to go ahead and just stack a little additional guy here or there.
It's pretty good.
It's not too bad, yeah. Bound Viridian Psychogeist. Aberrant class or War Dog model only. Each time the bearer makes an attack on an unmodified wound roll of 6, improve the armor penetration characteristic by 2.
Shuriken.
Each time the bearer is selected to shoot or fight, you can re-roll 1 damage roll when resolving the model's attack. So this is like a very interesting relic because you don't really have a lot of weapons that roll damage results. It's pretty much your Melta or your Demon Breath weapons. And they're already AP 4. So AP 6, that doesn't really appeal to me. And re-rolling the damage roll, like, that's nice, but I feel like
most
why?
things that
Yeah,
they have an
why?
invul, or yeah, that's true. Maybe like Redemptor Dreadnoughts with Armor of Contempt.
But your rate of fire is so low with these Melta weapons, banking on the additional +2 AP, it doesn't make sense to me.
I was just trying to answer your question, Leo.
I mean, I guess, like, if you take the Stalker with a chain cannon or maybe even the Gatling cannon and you want to force AP 4, that's okay, but then you're still losing the other half of the relic. And I don't understand what's going on. Maybe, yeah, that's it.
That really is Redemptor Dreadnoughts. I can't think of anything else that's like that scary that you would require AP 5.
I don't know. I'm going to tuck this relic away in the probably never going to use it.
Shuriken.
The Traitor's Mark. The bearer has the following ability. Traitor's Mark, Dreaded. Whilst an enemy unit is within dread range, the bearer, your opponent cannot select a unit to use the Insane Bravery stratagem, and it cannot use any ability that lets it re-roll its morale test. Once per battle at the start of the battle round, after you've selected a Harbinger ability, so starting on turn 2 is when you can use this. Once you've selected Harbinger ability to be active for your army, you can select one other Harbinger ability from that battle round, regardless of what the Harbinger ability was selected in the previous battle round. The selected Harbinger ability is active for the bearer for the rest of the battle. This does not affect which Harbinger ability you can select in the next battle round. So it's really confusing if you don't know what the Harbinger ability is, but it was previewed in Warhammer Community that you've got the tree of 3 different paths to go with your different buffs. So this allows you to apply a different ability to you. So even though you've selected a certain branch of the tree, you just pick something else, and now you're benefiting from it all. The Gauntlet of Ascension. Again, another melee weapon that it's kind of like, not something that appeals to me too much. Each time an attack is made with this weapon, select one of its profiles below to make an attack with. Each time the attack is made with this weapon, you can re-roll the hit roll. Each time an enemy character model is destroyed by an attack with this weapon, you add 1 to your strength and attacks characteristics for the remainder of the game. So if your opponent, if you plan on playing people with lots of characters all the time, you can try and do this and farm strength and attacks. And I missed it before, but it replaces your Warp Strike Claw, and it pretty much is just a power fist that you get additional strength and attacks with the more you play. That's really nothing too great. The Twisted Mask, Psyker model only. The bearer knows 1 additional psychic power from the Warp Storm discipline. Add 1 to the psychic test taken for the bearer. So not a bad relic for an Abominate. Panoply of the Cursed Knights, Aberrant class or War Dog only. The bearer has a 2+ save. Not too bad, because that's a way to essentially have a 5-up invulnerable in melee in a lot of instances, so not a bad pick necessarily. Soul Raptor Swarm, a Terra Shade model only. Each time the bearer would lose a wound as a result of a mortal wound, unless from Demonic Surge, on a 4+, the wound is not lost. The bearer has the following ability. Soul Raptor Dreaded. While an enemy unit is within dread range of the bearer, each time a model flees from that unit, the bearer regains 1 lost wound to a maximum of 3 regained wounds per phase. Helm of Dogs. War class only, or War Dog class only. Add 1 to the attack characteristic of the bearer. The bearer has the following ability. Helm of Dogs Aura. While a friendly War Dog class model is within 6 inches of the bearer, each time the model makes an attack, re-roll wound rolls of 1. That's pretty good to have just like a little War Dog lieutenant running around.
Yep. I think that one might be my favorite relic.
Yeah, like there's a couple really good ones in there that you need to like pick and choose what you're trying to do with your list,
Yeah.
what you're trying to accomplish, and there are some that I'm just like, go away.
Yeah, there's certainly visible utility going on. So yeah, as evident even through the relics. But I think, it seems like the sheer power of knights come from the knights themselves. That's fair. Let's talk about the Codex-specific secondaries. I'm very excited.
I'm just glad that you have the option to do stuff.
Yes.
Like Adam had said in the other review, spoilers, sorry, knights pretty much only had opportunity to do like burning it or
Stranglehold,
to
grind,
the last and grind and
or assassination.
yeah, that was very limited on what you can accomplish. So
yeah.
At least you can sub one of those out for something special from now on.
Yeah, and even where did they release it?
The chapter approved book, or and then latest GT pack they offered up one.
In the latest GT pack, they and it was okay if I recall. I don't really remember it being standout, but let's see how these fare. So for the Purge the Enemy category, the first one is a fitting challenge. So if you select this objective before the battle starts, after you have selected deployment zones, you must identify which 3 units from your opponent's army have the highest points value, and make a note of them. If 2 or more units are tied, your opponent can choose between them. If your opponent's army has 3 or fewer units, then you instead identify all the units in your opponent's army. A unit's point cost includes the points of all weapons and war gear. It's basically total cost. If a unit splits into several smaller units during the battle, all of those separate units must be destroyed for the original unit to count as having been destroyed for the purposes of this objective. At the end of each battle round, you score a number of victory points for each identified unit that was destroyed during the battle by a Chaos Knight unit from your army to a maximum of 6 victory points per battle round. The number of VPs scored depends on the battle round during which each unit was destroyed, as shown in the table. So the table shows battle round 1, you can score 6, battle round 2, 5, battle round 3, 4, and ending with battle round 5 being able to score max 2. So this is pretty good.
It's all right. It gives your opponent agency to either try and hide things from you, or it becomes completely dependent on your ability to engage those models and wipe them out. So
it feels like a very Psych Hammer secondary for me, because typically, especially if you're picking the highest points value units, you're going to force your opponent to play those a little bit more conservatively than they would. And especially if they are the highest points value units, they're probably going to be the ones that can threaten your knights the most. That's why I think it's definitely an option.
Yeah, it's not terrible. I just don't like giving my opponent to hide and deny me points.
Double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah. No mercy, no respite or respite. Pretty sure it's respite.
I say respite. Tomato, tomato.
English. In this category, we have Path of Destruction. So you score 1 victory point at the end of the battle round for each of the following conditions that were satisfied during that battle round, for a maximum of 3 victory points. So these are the 3 conditions. 1 or more enemy units were destroyed by a Chaos Knight's model from your army while that Chaos Knight's model was wholly within your deployment zone. Second condition, 1 or more enemy units were destroyed by a Chaos Knight's model from your army while that Chaos Knights model was more than 3 inches away from either player's deployment zone. And lastly, 1 or more enemy units were destroyed by a Chaos Knights model from your army, while that Chaos Knights model was wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. What do you think about this one?
I feel like it's really hard to max out 15 points.
Yeah, I don't like this one.
I don't like it because it dictates your movement.
Yes.
Sometimes you don't want stuff to be sitting back forever. Yes, you want to hold your objectives in your backfield, but your line of sight's limited. Your charging targets are very limited.
I feel very strongly against secondaries like this, where it forces you to potentially play bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
To make poor decisions.
To score 1 point. or up to 3 points, sorry.
Or it's like, do you just say, forget it, and just try and brawl for the middle and in their deployment area?
Right.
Or vice versa, and never engage them in their deployment area.
Just take Stranglehold.
Yeah.
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 For battle, or yeah, I guess different category. But Battlefield Supremacy category, we've got Ruthless Tyranny. If you select this objective at the end of your turn, you score victory points as follows for a maximum of 4 victory points. First condition, first bullet point, score 2 victory points if you control half or more of the total number of objective markers on the battlefield, and 1 or more Chaos Knights model from your army are within a range of each of those objective markers. Score 1 victory point if half or more of the total number of objective markers on the battlefield are within dread range of 1 or more Chaos Knights model from your army. And then lastly, score 1 victory point if every objective marker on the battlefield is within dread range of 1 or more Chaos Knights models from your army.
I like this one a lot more than the one before it, because having at least a 12-inch bubble from your models just to touch an objective to score points, that doesn't feel bad.
And there's ways to combine and extend like dread range too if you were actually teching for this secondary.
Right, or teching for dreaded things to begin with.
Yeah.
So you can play around this secondary pretty well.
Yeah, I would say it's like more of a reliable 3 points because it's essentially like a stranglehold configuration here, and then pretty much that, the cherry on top is that last condition with all markers on the board being within dread range. Like you could do it, maybe more difficult late game on 6 objective missions, but
Yeah, I also think the important thing for the 2 points is just holding half.
Yep.
Or more.
Yep.
And that makes things much safer for you to not overextend too fast or anything like that. So even if you just pound this secondary out for 10 points a game, hey, you're doing great.
Yeah. And then lastly, under the Shadow Operations category, we've got Storm of Darkness. It's an action-based. Interesting. So if you select this objective, then Chaos Knights units from your army can attempt the following action. Storm of Darkness is the name of the action, because that's important.
You all right?
I think I'm getting like really Chaos Knight spicy reading through this.
Insanity sinking in.
It is. 1 Chaos Knights unit from your army can start to perform this action at the end of the morale phase if it is in range of an objective marker that has not already been cursed by your army. A unit cannot start this action while there are any enemy units, excluding aircraft units, in range of the same marker. The action is completed at the end of your next psychic phase. Provided the unit performing it is still within range of the same objective marker, if completed, that objective marker is said to have been cursed by your army, and until the end of the battle, whilst a non-chaos unit is within 6 inches of that objective marker, subtract 1 from the leadership characteristics of models in that unit. Score 3 points each time a unit from your army completes the Storm of Darkness action.
It's actually not too bad, because even though it's an action, you don't sacrifice much of anything, because you can move on to the objective, or at least you can do it on your backfield easily, get 6 points over the first 2 turns, while other knights move into position up the table. So it's not bad. You do it in the morale phase, and as long as you're kind of standing around somewhere, you're good. So
they're pretty unique.
yeah,
I think if anything, it's not like the whole secondaries section of this book doesn't seem horrible considering even with the recently released codexes. I do find myself and find other people taking the codex specific ones when they're out of options. And, there's a pretty good variety in here from what I'm saying.
There's like 2 that I can see myself picking consistently when I'm kind of like running out of options.
No auto takes, but
not necessarily any auto takes, because some things might be better from a generic secondary. But you also have to think of this. This is affecting the game state because you now have areas of -1 leadership.
Yeah.
So that makes dreaded abilities that much more dangerous. It's like, oh, now you want to try and take this objective from me. Now you're standing near me.
Right.
Now you're at a -2, -3, -4 to leadership. But that is the secondaries. Not the worst out there.
No.
But nothing to be upset about.
Yeah. Everything's quite balanced so far, in my opinion.
Yeah. And overall, I still think that this book, while it has less than their loyalist counterparts, I think they still come out ahead. And because even their secondaries, like, I was not too impressed with any of their secondaries at all. And their army-wide ability, it's very punishing and could lead you to not play the game in an effective manner. Which we're coming up on Harbingers of Dread, which there's really only upside to it. Something of note, specifically in this book, it has a little section that specifies Chaos Knight miniatures. And it says, some Chaos Knight datasheets in the section are based on the chassis of Imperial Knights, and to build some of the variants of Chaos Knights, you will need Imperial Knight kits. To build the Executioners, the Huntsmen, use regular Helverins and Armiger or in Warglaive boxes. To build a Knight Despoiler, use an Imperial Knight Warden kit, and to build a Tyrant, use a Knight Castellan or Valiant kit. So it's nice that it gives you permission to just go ahead and, yes, these are the kits you're supposed to use. Special abilities specifically for the army. Yes, you have your Ion Shield, so you always have a 5-up and vulnerable save versus ranged attacks. Super Heavy Walkers, you get your specification that your models are allowed to move over other models unless they're vehicles or monsters. And then the whole squadron rule for your war dogs. But pretty much all that's no different than anything before. And now we are specifically into the Dread Test section. And like I said before, Dread Tests are just leadership tests. Take them on 2d6. If you fail, you probably have something bad happen. Otherwise, you pass if you roll less than your leadership value. It also now will probably show a little symbol here that modifies or annotates abilities that are specifically dreaded abilities. Unless specifically stated or affected in some other manner, you are to assume all of your dreaded abilities are 12 inches, and they are not an aura ability, so they're not affected in any sort of way. I'm pretty sure I covered that earlier. So anyone that can affect your aura range or do something weird doesn't matter for these abilities. Now, the kind of confusing, but still very straightforward Harbingers of Dread ability. You unlock this ability if your entire army is Chaos Knights, except for Unaligned or Agents of Chaos. The way that it works is it is a branching tree that has 3 different branches. During the 1st and 5th battle round, you must select from the Doom category. You can only select the Despair ability if you select the Despair or Doom ability to the previous battle round. You can only select the Darkness ability if you selected the Darkness or Doom ability previous battle round. So pretty much what that's saying is, as you have the tree, Doom goes up the center, Despair goes one way, Darkness goes another. So once you start along your path on turn 2, you can select right or left, or keep going up the center. Once you have selected a specific path, you can only come back to center or go up continually in whatever path you've chosen. That's just something to keep in mind. Like we've already seen in other things, there are definitely ways that you can specifically go ahead and pick other sections and apply those as needed. And once you have come across one of these abilities and selected it, they are in play the rest of the game, which, depending on how you need to move around the board or move around this tree, that could be very devastating or very impactful on your opponent's abilities.
Yeah, I think this was very well done. As we're seeing more things like this, obviously like doctrines kind of pave the way. But, like I keep using Custodes because I think the book was, written very, very interestingly within like the katas, like shuffling those, but actually gaining all of these like cumulatively is pretty massive.
Yeah, some of them are really good. Some of them you're kind of torn because you're like, oh, I want both of these, which there are ways to do that.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to have a plan. You need to look at this tree and you need to know what is the best way to approach certain opponents. So it's good that they're all cumulative, but you need to have a plan.
During list building.
Not even just during list building, in game, because as the game is going, you progress however you want.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, yeah. So even most recently, like Tyranids, they're able to choose kind of like what they want to swap around after they know who goes first, right?
Right.
So that's pretty cool too. So, like Leo was saying, I could see how at face value, this looks very, very confusing. I think it is very straightforward. It's just difficult to get used to. So maybe, what it seems like to me is kind of pick like maybe a couple or maybe 2 to 3 variations of like what kind of optimal paths you would do, saying like, hey, if I'm taking into like a fast army, I'll probably do this. If I'm going into a, like really melee heavy army, I'm going into this. That's at least what I like to do when kind of dealing with like new complicated rules or complex rules.
Yeah, and you can just let it ride down the Doom train. It doesn't matter.
Just roll a d6.
I wouldn't do that, but
You said let it ride.
Oh, you're right. Put it all on black. All right, so like the rule had stated, on turn 1, you start in the Doom category, and the level 1 Doom ability is Dread Host, and it is a dreaded ability. It's got that little skull symbol. While an enemy unit is within dread range of this model, subtract 1 from the leadership characteristic of the models in the enemy unit. Each time a combat attrition test is taken for the enemy unit, subtract 1 from the combat attrition test. That doesn't sound too great on its own, but things get much worse the later in the game you're progressing. So, starting on turn 2, now you have the option to continue through the Doom category or split into Despair or Darkness. So, the second level of Doom is Encroaching Doom. Add 3 inches to the model's dread range. Now you're at a 15-inch range, and you still have -1 leadership, +1 to combat attrition test. That's not too bad, and when you have such a large base, that is a 36-inch diameter, more or less, on a Helverin or so. On a larger knight, 39, something crazy like that, and you're just reaching really far across the table. So if you dominate that center board, you're reaching out and touching a whole bunch. The first level of Despair is Creeping Dismay. While an enemy unit is within dread range, if the enemy unit has any aura abilities, subtract 3 inches from the range of those abilities. If the enemy unit has abilities that are used in the command phase, subtract 3 inches from the range of those abilities. So if you're playing against, like, say, a Space Marine player that has their apothecary sitting there and their captain and their lieutenant, and you just so happen to get a knight into dreaded range, they might have stretched out 6 inches just to benefit as much as they could. Now all their ranges are down to 3. Now no one's benefiting from anything. Now someone has a really big problem on their hand because they're not buffing their armor, or they're not buffing their army appropriately.
That's scary.
That could be really problematic for some people. The first level of Darkness is Geist Storm, which is another dreaded ability. While an enemy unit is within dread range of this model, each time that unit is selected to shoot with, and each time that unit wishes to declare a charge, it must first take a dreaded test. If the test is passed, it can select targets for shooting attack or declare a charge as normal. Otherwise, until the end of the phase, models in the enemy unit cannot make ranged attacks unless they target the closest eligible target to the closest eligible Chaos Knight unit. If the enemy unit declares a charge against the Chaos Knight unit, any charge rolls are halved. So you can start essentially body blocking your opponent's bullets by dictating who and what they can start shooting. Or if they really, really want to go into a charge, if you have Geiss Storm up, they're at the or even if they're 6 inches away from your knight, now they need to roll a 12 to come at you. If they failed that test, they're at -1 for their test. That sucks. Turning an easy 6-inch charge into a near impossible 12-inch charge, that's not going to be great for your opponent on any plans that they have. Progressing on to turn 3, up the Doom category. So remember, now that you've been able to select which branch you go, you can only either come back to Doom or continue up Despair or Darkness. So level 3 of Doom is Mortal Terror. While an enemy unit is within dreaded range of the model, each time the unit fails a morale test, one additional model flees from that unit before combat attrition tests are taken. If the result of morale test is at least twice that of the highest leadership characteristic, then D3 models flee instead.
Oh.
So now you're seeing all these stacking leadership debuffs actually have a place in the game, where in a lot of other armies, they don't really do anything, or they're very, very ones-offy.
Right.
This is
stacks.
That's disgusting. Because even someone that has a decent leadership, leadership 8, oops, I failed. Now you're just losing handfuls of models all the time. Back through Despair, Empiric Fuge. Wege?
Fugu.
Empiric Fuge. while the enemy is within dreaded range of the model, each time an enemy unit wishes to start performing an action, it must first pass a dreaded test. If the test is failed, it cannot perform the action. At the start of the morale phase, if that enemy unit is currently performing an action, it must take a dreaded test. If that test is failed, the action is currently performing immediately fails. That's a pretty huge way to just mess up someone's entire scoring potential, or as later books have come out, doing different things to buff certain ways, that can hurt. That could be a massive point swing in a game. Darkness level 3. Pall of Darkness. Each time a range attack is made against this model, if the attacker is more than 12 inches away, subtract 1 from the attack's hit roll. So that could be pretty nice to protect your backfield, or you've managed to lock someone up close to the deployment zone. That makes the midfield pretty safe as well. Because no one likes shooting T7 or T8 models when they're having any sort of penalty come their way. Level 4 of Doom. While an enemy unit is within dread range of the model, subtract 2 from the leadership characteristic of models of that unit. Now people are really starting to fail their leadership checks. Now they're really starting to fail their dreaded tests.
And mind you, if you get there, it all stacked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, even if you come out of Doom, any one that you have selected is currently in play. Despair, level 4. Paralyzing Insanity. While an enemy unit is within dreaded range of the model, if that unit has the objective secured ability, it loses it. Again, now you're just screwing with someone's scoring potential. Granted, it's in the late game, but sometimes you don't have much left to score with in the late game, so you need to be on that objective. And if a War Dog is standing there, I have objective secured and you don't, I'm sorry, bud. Level 4 of Darkness. Veil of Shadows. Each time a melee attack is made against this model, subtract 1 from the attack's hit roll. So now some of the knights are walking around a little beat up, and now you're trying to finish things off in combat. Makes it that much harder. And then finally, in turn 5, you have to come back to Doom and Horror of the Warp. While an enemy unit is within dread range of this model, each time a combat attrition test is taken for that unit, subtract 1 from the combat attrition test. On an unmodified 1 or 2, models flee instead of 1. So now, just between turns 1 and turn 5, they have a +1 to their combat attrition test, and no matter if they're half strength or whatever, a 1 and 2 means a model's running.
Yeah, because it's 2 separate rules. So even if you're going up against an army that always ignores or cannot be affected by combat attrition modifiers, they're still fleeing on a 1 or 2, right?
Mm-hmm. So they won't flee on a 3.
Yeah.
But now the rule has changed
to
on
1
a
and
1
2.
or a 2.
Yeah.
That Space Marine is still running.
Right. It's pretty big.
Which, if it's not a Space Marine, if you decided to run the entire rails of Doom, units are -3 to their leadership without any other buffs, just by standing within 12 inches of you. And now on up to a 4 up, they're losing additional models.
That's crazy. What I'm noticing is that there are some similarities between the Harbingers of Dread tree traits that remind me of what some of the warlord traits and the relics and the stratagems do. Mm-hmm. So it is quite interesting to see how much you could potentially combine, especially with the leadership bomb specifically. But even the -1 to hit, I feel like is the -1 to hit Veil of Shadows at 12 inches away seems better than the whole 18 inches transhuman on hits. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. It's just that extra 6 inches. Not a fan of it. So it's this one's free.
Yeah.
I could probably you could potentially tech into this one versus.
And that's the beauty is with the different relics and abilities and everything that's been covered earlier in this book. You can play to abuse this. Well, not abuse this, but you can maximize its potential. Some high leadership armies might not really care about it, but you're going to run around the average leadership armies, and they're just going to have models evaporate.
I don't know. Even with the highest leadership army, an 11 across the board for Custodes. I mean, if you're stacking -3s and -4s, that hurts, man. And if you lose a model to leadership.
Especially when you're rolling around with 3 model units.
Right.
Let's see the math here. You lost 2 in shooting,
mm-hmm.
so that puts you down technically to a 9. Mm-hmm. You're at a -3, so now you're at a 6. So you would need some other kind of leadership debuffs to roll a 6 or a 5, mm-hmm. depending on how many you've got going. But that's still oh no, I lost that model when I never would have lost them before. And then now that objective is free, or now that's less stuff going on in the game.
Right, and you turned off OPSEC.
Yeah. Which, Custodes, rest in peace.
We already lost OPSEC.
We already lost quite a bit of OPSEC.
Too soon.
Oh, sorry, man. But that's the Harbingers of Dread rule. I'm actually pretty happy with that, especially compared to the Loyalists' Acts of Chivalry.
Yeah, this is awesome.
This is much easier to manage, much easier to remember, and honestly much more impactful, probably in more instances.
Really easy. Just make tokens. We should get Engineer Mike to make tokens for everybody.
Card.
That too.
Bingo card, laminate it, mark it down as you go. Finally, we're to the data sheet section.
To the War Dog section.
Now, a massive surprise to many of you, there hasn't been many changes across the board in the actual data sheets of these different models, except for the movement characteristic. Everything has gotten slower by 2 inches, so all of the War Dogs are now moving 12 instead of 14, except for the Carnivore. The Carnivore is still trucking along at 14. I guess just not carrying all that ammo. You're just a little bit more zip zop zooey. But every other War Dog is down to 12. All of the Aberrant class models down to 10 inches, except for the Rampager, which the Rampager is, again, still at 12. And the Tyrant models down to 8, but they have a 2-up save now. That's pretty much the only changes to the profiles on the model itself. Weapons are pretty substantially changed, or at least quality of life changes that just makes them that much better. So the Wardog Executioner, or the Helverin, the dual autocannons, they've been changed to be Strength 7, AP 2, Damage 3. They were AP 1, so the additional bump up, phenomenal. That means that into Armor of Contempt, those bodies aren't getting 3-up saves anymore. Now they're forced to the 4-up. Anything that isn't Armor of Contempt, typically taking 5-ups, maybe 6-ups, and just chunking things down at damage 3 at a 60-inch range with each gun getting 2d3 shots. Executioners are in a pretty good spot now, or at least in my opinion. They can sit back, hold your backfield. They just shoot down any firing lanes that you provide them. The random number of shots is always scary, but they're in a good position now to actually kill what they go after, especially with a lot of those stratagems of exploding 6s or auto wounds or anything like that going on. Even the loyalist knights, their side armament, that is the melt-a-gun or the demon breath weapon or the heavy stubbers, the default loadout now is melt-a-guns. I don't think that was always the case, but that's just something you need to think about during list creation. Is technically it's going to default to fit you with a melt-a-gun when you might want the stubber for less points. So that's the Executioner. Something of note of the Executioner and the Huntsman, which I will get to, they do not have the Terror Shade keyword, whereas the brand new 3 of them, or 3 new War Dogs, do have the Terror Shade. So next up is the War Dog Stalker. The cool thing about the Stalker is it can either take the new Avenger Chain Cannon, which is 36 inches, Assault 12, Strength 6, AP 2, Damage 1. So if you need some chaff clearing at range, they're a pretty good fit-in. And they come with a Slaughter Claw. So that is Strength times 2, which would put them at Strength 12, AP 3, and then D3 plus 3 damage. The cool thing about them is they can swap that melee weapon for the Chain Glaive or the Chain Talon. And they can swap out the Avenger Gatling Cannon or the Avenger Chain Cannon for a Demon Breath Spear. So maybe you want additional anti-tank instead of anti-horde, and you want to change out your melee loadout to have a sweet profile. He's flexible enough that he can do whatever you want him to do. The Carnivore is the new purely melee one, that it has the Reaper Chain Talon, which they've got put you at Strength 10, AP 4, Flat 3, or they sweep for 2 damage or for 2 attacks per attack, which they have a 5 attack base, so they have +1 attack. And the sweep is AP 3, Damage 1, attack or Strength user. And they have the Slaughter Claw, so they're definitely there just to punch some stuff. And all 3 of the new ones, instead of taking the Stubber, they can take a Havoc Multi-Launcher, which is a heavy D6, Strength 5 mortar. Kind of got hurt in the data slate before it had a chance to do anything, but sometimes some Strength 5 shots at something you can see is just as good.
This guy's pretty crazy in melee.
Yeah, he can get 10 attacks with his sweeps or 5 monstrous high damage, high AP attacks. So they're pretty good.
2 CP to +1 to wound, 1 CP to explode.
Yep, there's a lot of good things. Like they will always suffer from the can I make it there?
Yeah.
But at 14 inches, 17 inches, if you're Infernal Household,
right,
that's not bad because...
Yeah, I think Carnivores would be a good squad to actually buff up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because what is it? 17 and 12 is 29 inches. They have a 29-inch threat range as Infernal, which that safely puts them in a very feasible deployment-to-deployment charge.
Yeah.
That's kind of scary.
Especially you could take them in squads of 3.
Yeah. Which Again, all of these can be taken in squads of 3s, and it just allows you to fit more into the 5-unit limit in a super heavy. Next is the War Dog Brigand. It is essentially the dual gun War Dog now. So it can take the Demon Breath Spear or the Reaper Chain Cannon. It can also take its little rocket hat if it wants. Honestly, I don't really rate this one as high as even the Executioner. Mainly, I just like the flat 3 damage of the Executioner and having the flexibility to be a melee thing. This is probably my least favorite of all of them now. And lastly, we've got the War Dog Huntsman, which is exactly the same as the Loyalist Warglaive. Got a Demon Breath Spear and the Reaper Chain Talon. The only difference really between running this and the Melta Melee Stalker is it doesn't have the Terra Shade keyword. So it's kind of whatever you want to kit out the Stalker with, if you want the anti-infantry shooting or not. And if you value the Terra Shade keyword. Most notably, the biggest change to the Demon Breath Spear or the Thermal Spear, which now it's got the crazy cool name. It's changed down from 36 inches down to 30, heavy 2 instead of heavy or assault D3, and it's now strength 9, AP 4, D6 damage with the Melter rule. So if you're at half range, plus 2 damage.
I like that. Reliability of even the 2 shots is pretty big.
Yeah, it's a massive quality of life change. It's kind of sad that it is now changed to heavy instead of assault, so you can't really add the additional advance and get speed around terrain, but it's still, I'll take the heavy 2 over the D3 shots. Next is the Knight Despoiler, and it's the first style of the Aberrant class Knights. The thing about these, is, especially compared to their Loyalist counterparts, is any kind of buff that they give out to the War Dogs, they are aura-based instead of select the unit in the command phase and just give it to them. So as long as you have these Aberrant-style Knights running alongside your little boys, you're going to be buffing all of them out together. We already covered the one stratagem that you can technically count a War Dog as if they're in aura range the entire time, no matter where they're at on the table. So, Knight Despoiler. Biggest change for this guy is, again, the reduced movement. Everything else is exactly the same as it was. You can still give it 2 of the same ranged weapons. You can kit it out as a melee knight. When you do any of those things of giving it 2 of the same shooting weapon or giving it the melee loadout, its base point cost is increased by 20 points. I don't really think this was necessary on GW's part in order to try and disincentivize people from bringing double thermal cannons or anything like that, but that's the rule with it now. They do get fairly expensive when you do start giving them the dual weapon options, but they're a pretty good fire base, just like they always have been, especially in the Infernal household when you can just start giving one of your weapons plus 1 to wound. Their specific aura is Dread Damnation, and while a friendly War Dog is within 9 inches of the model, that unit can do a heroic intervention, just like it was a character. There's also an additional rule of Engine of Destruction, that if you do end up kitting it out with the 2 melee weapons, it gets plus 1 attack if it charges, gets charged, or heroically intervenes. So that puts it almost on par with the Rampager, but it's still going to have weapon skill 3 compared to the weapon skill 2 of the Rampager. Next up is the Knight Desecrator. This one's kind of a hard sell for me unless you're taking a lot of Executioners and a lot of Brigands to leverage out the Taskmaster aura, which is War Dogs within 9 inches get to re-roll any ranged attacks, hit rolls of 1. So that's pretty nice. The issue I have with the Knight Desecrator is it still doesn't really have a crazy amount of offensive output at range. The Laser Destructor is 72 inches, heavy 2, strength 14, AP 5, D3 plus 6 damage. The Relic we covered earlier turns that to heavy 3 and bumps up the strength to 16. The low rate of fire is still what's going to kill this guy. or at least kill his efficiency on the table. He's okay in melee because he either gets the Warp Strike Gauntlet or the Reaper Chainsword. If you're building to a lot of shooting war dogs, this is probably an okay pick. Just don't expect a lot out of him except for standing there and buffing before he dies.
It's still quite a lot of points for a force multiplier.
Exactly.
Right.
I think base cost he's 400 points. So as soon as you start adding on those favors of the gods, I'm not too sure he's the best option.
He's a big boy.
Yep. Next up is the Knight Rampager, which he has maintained his 12-inch movement compared to the other knights that have all lost their movement. Still weapon skill 2, ballistic skill 3. Everything else is exactly the same at 5 base attacks. He's exactly as he used to be. He's got one of each of the melee weapons and then a stubber, and that's pretty much it. Or the Melt-A-Gun if that's what you decide. His special aura ability for War Dogs is War Dogs within 9 inches get to reroll melee attack hit rolls of 1. So if you're going to go ahead and flood the table with carnivores or stalkers or even huntsmen, this is a pretty good investment. I rate him above the Desecrator just because he has the full-on aggressive melee push. Depending on whatever household you're taking, if you take Korvax, he's running through terrain, getting to where he needs to be, getting 15-inch move, all that kind of stuff. Give him corn buffs, make him reroll charges. So I do think the Rampager is slightly better than the Desecrator if you're going to be taking some of these aberrant chassis. The newest knight, outside of the War Dogs, the Knight Abominant. 10-inch move just like everyone else. Same exact stat line across the board. Instead of having the aura abilities, he has the Psyker keyword so he can cast psychic powers. He specifically can attempt to manifest 2 and deny 1, and he knows 2 from the Warp Storm Discipline and Smite. So through various other means, you can give him bonuses to the amount of denies he has or additional casts. He's okay. If you want that additional knight with cool utility, that's awesome. The model looks amazing. Specifically, the Volkite Combustor. It's only a 30-inch range, but heavy 6, strength 10, AP 1, damage 3. And it has the typical Volkite rule that on a 6 to wound, it does flat 3 mortal wounds in addition to normal damage.
Yeah, I like that. The flat 3 damage on a Volkite. That's the first ever, right? This is
I believe
brand new?
Daradeo's also...
Oh, the Daradare variants.
Yes, I think they also had 3 mortal wound potential. The problem with both of them, though, technically, is the low rate of fire, because you only get those 6 shots. You might only get 1/6 in the wound phase or the wound section of your attack, but it's pretty cool.
Not a bad one to consider doing the Tesla or the the exploding 6s upgrade on.
I think that was only War Dogs, right?
Was it?
Might have been. If it's not, fantastic. If it is, not an option. It does have its Bale Mace tail. And what this does is you attack at strength user, AP 2, damage 2, and whenever you attack, you get D3 additional attacks with this weapon specifically. The sad part about this knight is he has the lowest amount of base attacks out of any of the knights at 3. So he's going to get either 3 stomps plus the D3, or if you use the cool Electro Scourge, each attack gets 3 attacks, so you would have 9. And that is also strength user, AP 2, damage 3. Finally, to the Knight Tyrant.
Your favorite.
It's so sad on how not great they are. They've been reduced down to 8-inch move. They still have weapon skill 4, ballistic skill 3, 28 wounds, and the only benefit they've received is a 2-up flat armor save. Will that drastically help it out? Maybe. But the issue at this point is it is so point intensive for the Volcano Lance and the Ectoplasma Decimator. The Volcano Lance suffers from the same exact issue that the Turbo Laser of the Desecrator has. This one, though, is only D3 shots. Blast, Strength 16, AP 5, D6 plus 8 damage. While you might be impressed by that potential damage, most things that it wants to put that into will probably have an invulnerable save that'll blunt any of the damage that comes through it. The swingy rate of fire makes it not great. It doesn't have any sort of rule that allows you to reroll versus Titanic like it used to, or anything like that. Just not a great weapon in the grand scheme of things. And the Ectoplasma Decimator is pretty much the same exact as it is, which it doesn't have the benefit of the Loyalist versions of these knights, where you can at least upgrade it with Call's Wrath. So you're just getting bog standard, heavy 2d6, strength 8 or 9, damage 2 or 3, blast, and if you end up rolling a 1 and you're overcharging, you take 2 mortal wounds instead of 1 if you roll a 1 to hit. Not great. The Shield Breaker missiles or the Geiss Strike missiles are the same as they used to be. Everything else exactly the same, and they don't have any sort of aura buffs that they give out to the War Dogs. So you essentially just take it to try and be a gunboat. I don't think it's worth it because you can bring like 4 War Dogs for the cost of one of them. You can bring an Aberrant Scale Knight for that and get better results. So that's pretty much him. The other weapon loadout for it, equally not as great, pretty much all exactly the same. The Harpoon it's still just the one shot. I hope it gets it. It has a little bit added ways to do the damage that it needs to do. But again, I can't stress enough how much I think these guys are not worth taking anymore. But that is the entire Chaos Knight Codex. The War Dogs are pretty much anywhere between 140 to 155 points base. And then they can take a 5-point weapon upgrade for their little hat weapon, either the Stubber to the Melta or the Stubber to the Havoc launchers. All of the other Aberrant Knights pretty much start around 400 points after you put the appropriate weapons on them or anything like that. And then the Tyrant starting at a massive 585 points. And then you have to pay for the additional Volcano Lance or the Desecrator Cannon that you throw on it. So
Mostly well points costed, I would say.
the War Dogs are aggressively pointed. Mm-hmm. Again, it's going to be super easy to get 6, 7, 8 War Dogs in a list, depending on how many Aberrant or Tyrant style models you want to take.
I can't wait to try 3 War Dogs in my Death Guard list.
I'm sure they'll help you out, and do you plan on bringing the Executioners, or are you bringing more melee potential?
Well, based on what you were saying, it seems like the Executioner is kind of the way to go because, I've used to great success complementing like long range, or the need for like long range firepower with, of course, Volkite Contemptors. But I think these bring a lot more flavor, and especially with like all the things, regardless of not having houses, brings to the table, it's pretty interesting. They can do things in different capacities. So, points for points are pretty close to Contemptors. Actually, they're cheaper right now.
They're cheaper than Contemptors.
Yeah.
Like by about 30 points when you fully roll them out.
So whatever it comes out to, like 460, 470-ish, somewhere around there for 3 War Dogs.
I think it's 465 for 3. And the more I've kind of marinated on it, the more I've begun to appreciate the Brigand as opposed to when I spoke about it even just minutes ago. It gives you the utility of, all right, I'm going to slam you with Melta, I'm going to clear out chaff all at the same time. So I'm going to change my opinion on them. They're pretty good. Do I still rate the Executioner higher than them at this point? Yes, but not as bad as I initially had mentioned a few minutes ago. But other than that, that is the entire Chaos Knight Codex. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you have any suggestions on how we should change up the format or go back to previous formats, let us know in the comments down below. Go ahead, like, comment, tell us how silly we were or how many things we got wrong, and share this with not your grandma this time. You do it your nephew. We need new wargamers in the group, so go ahead and tell them all about Chaos Knights. But that's all we have here at Black Rabbit Gaming. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.